Okay. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, one and all, to yet another episode of WhickTV, a cross-ideological space where we come together to talk about issues both political and cultural, from the silly to the serious, and the foreign and domestic as well, okay? We have a couple more guests that will be hopefully with us shortly, but time is of the essence. I want to respect everyone's time here, and I want to respect you, dear viewer, in your time here. And we're going to talk today about the situation in Russia. If you have not yet been made aware, there was a terror attack perpetrated on a concert hall, I believe it was, in Russia. What was the death count? Last I checked, it was 82,
Mm,
something like that. It was fairly higher than that. Fair enough.
Over 130.
Over
yeah, I
130.
think it's
Okay.
a lot more.
Um, obviously horrific. Obviously, um, any attacks on civilians are unconscionable. But I want to talk about the state of play in the Russian-Ukraine conflict as well, right? Ukraine has attacked Russian oil refineries and other energy targets. Um,
Based.
and we're just going to talk about just the reactions around it and kind of get a feel for all of this. So I guess we'll start off by letting everyone give a brief, like, tell people who you are, and then if you can, and then after we get those introductions out of the way, we'll get
Be
okay, we'll get into the discussion proper. But I guess we'll start off with Alucard Hex, please. Tell people who you are, and yeah, we'll
hello.
get through
Good.
what they're at.
Good afternoon, everyone. I believe this is my second appearance on a Wick panel, so I'm not a streamer myself as of this moment. I think I'm looking to get started potentially on streaming on Twitch again, but for now, for this stream, I was not able to get it going yet. But yeah, so I guess I was born and raised in Ukraine. I have some educational background in international relations, and I have been following this conflict very closely for the past 2 years. And in this particular case, I guess I'm looking to represent what I consider to be an underrepresented perspective of the Ukrainian nationalists, who I think um, I think, Wick, you have spoken with people like Anna, for example, extensively, right? Yeah, so I,
Yes.
I think she's kind of she's very smart, she's very polite, but I do not. Well, I guess I want to kind of come in a little more aggressively and try to express the pain that people are feeling for real, for real. So in that sense, I guess I'm looking. My goal for this panel would be to kind of find out to what extent do the panelists support the total denazification of Russia.
Well, we'll
Thank you very much.
of course. Thanks for being here. We'll get into it as we go. Brianna Wu, please.
So, first of all, Alucard, I just want to start by apologizing to you. I think America made a commitment to Ukraine. I think we've really failed. Our legislature has failed to give you the support that you need. I have failed. I've been trying my best to get people to understand that. I've not done enough. Y'all deserve better. You're literally trying to stop World War III. And I just wanted to start today by personally apologizing to you. It's embarrassing to be on a panel with someone that we are letting down as badly as we are. I really want to say, I feel like Americans, like it is true during the Bush years that they abused the idea of terrorism for political gain and to get us into pointless wars in an extremely cynical way that ended up destabilizing the entire Middle East. But it's also true that ISIS, even though it's lost territorial ground, it is still a threat. And specifically with this Russian attack, ISIS-K shows this strategy of ISIS just outsourcing terror to their regional affiliates. They still have operational capability. And I think people don't understand that ISIS-K has attacked America before. They did this in the 2021 withdrawal from Kabul at the airport, and they also have attacked the Russian embassy in 2022. So, we're going to have a lot of critique for Russia today and Vladimir Putin, but at the core, if I can get any message across today, it's that I think ISIS-K really illustrates this threat that's still present and why it's really important that America engage with other countries, We need intelligence sharing. We need to be able to do things like compare prison lists with other countries, so we can make sure if we have leaders come through and they go through the system, we can identify them and make sure they don't end up with our allies or even here at the homeland. So this is it's a very serious threat, and I look forward to an adult discussion today.
Okay, well, thank you for being here, and I'm sure we'll get into it as we go. Next up, we have non-smoker, who is our resident contrarian, if you will, who has a bit of a different perspective, but I'll let him introduce himself and give his opening thoughts, please.
Thanks. Non-smoker, Marxist-Leninist, Twitch streamer, educator, historian, etc., radio host. Yeah, I'm probably the only person, I know I'm the only person here with any sort of differing viewpoints on America's support of Ukraine. I don't consider myself a Russia supporter, but I feel like I've been kind of labeled that every time I try to talk to anyone about this, because I have the view that supporting Ukraine is perpetuating the conflict. But with that being said, I mean, the topic of the conversation is the terror attack in Russia. I'm not here to peddle conspiracies about it. I don't think that it was something that was carried out by like Israel or anything like that, or the United States directly. I also think that it is a little suspect and strange that, a terrorist attack would be carried out in Moscow around this time, considering, Russia's serious issues with ISIS anyway go all the way back to the Syrian civil war. Not to say that there isn't a problem there, but it seems a little odd timing and a little suspect. But I'm sure there's, more to the story that will come out through investigations. I think what's most interesting about it politically is that it's really emblematic of the problems in the information era we live in, that there's plausible reason for all sides involved in this to lie about it. And so I feel like all media, whether it's Russian media or Western media or whatever, they all have their stories they want to spin or tales they want to tell about this horrible, tragic event. And, you just don't know who to trust. And it's quite frustrating, and it's quite confusing and conflicting, and I'm not really sure what to make of it, other than to say it's a terrible tragedy. And I mean, I can't believe I'm really agreeing with Brianna about anything, but I will say that it is a reminder that terrorism is a very real threat in the world everywhere still. And yeah, in terms of the Russian-Ukraine conflict and where it's going, I mean, I feel like I've been saying this for 2 years straight, that I feel like the outcome of this war has already been predetermined. There will be a Russian victory. I think we're approaching that now, day by day, closer and closer, every moment that goes on. I don't necessarily think that's cause for celebration either, but it is what it is. So yes, we'll be here to talk about that when it's over too. That's it.
Okay, thank you for being here, and I do appreciate the perspective. Next up, first-time guest on my channel, Andrew, please.
Hey, thank you guys for having me. It's a pleasure. I've been with Dylan before, and we've done some work both in Ukraine and whatnot. So it's really good to be part of these panels. Thank you, Wick, for having me. Now, my position, I covered the breaking news about the terror attack. I had my own biases prior to, like, given the history of Russia and their false flag usage to further their own goals and their own aims geopolitically. But after ISIS-K came out and then admitted to it and said that we did it all, and then the internet basically was rejecting that completely. I'm looking more at it was ISIS-K, given Russia's history with ISIS. ISIS-K does not like Russia. They ignored the American intelligence, but they also, I mean, they completely retracted or ignored the American intelligence that Russia was going to invade Ukraine, and they were like, "No, we're not going to do that." I think it was December of 2021, and the State Department said Russia's going to invade. Russia was like, "No, we're not," and then they ended up doing so. So I think it's just more par for the course. Russia, I don't believe Russia worked with ISIS-K like to make this happen, but given that they had the intelligence and that they allowed it to happen anyways, and then now they're going to let the what's the phrase? Let the pieces fall where they may, or something like that, and kind of just play with the propaganda and the reaction of it. It's pulling people in different directions, both conspiratorial and analytical. But here we are. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, thanks for being here, and I'm sure we'll get into it as we go. Last but certainly not least, Dylan Burns. Go ahead. What are your thoughts?
Sorry, it's muted. It's been a bit since the question. Can you re-ask it? Because it felt like people were answering a lot of different things.
Oh, well, not so much a question. Just as I said in DMs, we're going to be talking about the Russian, terrorist attack in Russia, as well as the Ukrainian attacks on Russian targets
Yeah,
in
I just thought
Russia,
maybe there was an opening
etc.
question that I might have missed.
I can
Was
ask you
there?
one. Because
Yeah,
I
I
do
just thought
have
there was
one.
I just saw people talking about like
Yeah.
who's gonna win, and then I saw people talking about like the terror attack, and that's like a broad. What should I
understand.
focus on?
Pick one. Dealer's choice.
Okay, well then people already know my position on Ukraine. Support them. I think the $60 billion aid package is small. I think it should be closer to 100 to 120 billion.
Yeah.
My
Let's
position
go.
for a
Absolutely.
while has been that in order to end the war as soon as possible, you give the Ukrainians the ability to add pressure to the Russians so that they wear down the military capability faster, so this doesn't have to drag out. That's my position. I want to get the most bang for my buck when it comes to 155 millimeter artillery shells. I would like as much money to be possible to be, spent on schools and stuff. So get this over sooner rather than later is my position. Plus, people have heard me talk about why I support Ukraine for hours. So as for the Moscow terror attack, right when it happened, I was of course, I was immediately taken back by just how horrific it was, how cold these people are. These are real monsters. I'm happy that they got caught. I hope they face justice. I do gotta say that the torture that a lot of these terror suspects are facing, either the cutting off of the ear or the beatings or anything, of just like very open torture that's being posted online. While I don't particularly care about these individuals, as long as they're found to be guilty and they're not just some Joe Schmo they grabbed off the side of the road to say, look, we caught him, got him. But I will also say that type of behavior is pretty systematic in the Russian armed forces. The UN came out with a report a few weeks ago saying that type of treatment towards POWs is systematic, that over 90% of those in Russian detainment have faced some sort of mistreatment. Now, mistreatment could be anything from being like shoved or yelled at, like, you piece of shit motherfucker, all the way to beaten, raped. So that's a wide umbrella, but this type of mistreatment towards detained people is not just something that's reserved for the worst of the worst. It's reserved for a lot of people that come into Russian detainment. As for who is the suspect here, I stayed quiet. I just posted what we knew was facts at the time because I didn't want to jump to any conclusions. But after seeing all the facts gather, after ISIS claiming it, after seeing the footage at the time and seeing how those guys shot guns, they weren't shooting guns like they had a lot of experience. Those guys weren't soldiers. They were shooting the gun like this, and they were like throwing the bullets at them, which is something you only see happen if somebody is a poorly trained militiaman or they're, a terrorist, because they don't know how to properly hold the gun in place, so they feel like they got to do this every time they shoot at somebody. And this seems to match what ISIS has done in the past. ISIS has attacked countries all around the world, Algeria, Cameroon, so many different countries. And so a lot of people might be surprised to see, why would ISIS fight Russia? But Russia is an ally of Bashar al-Assad. A lot of people don't like Bashar al-Assad. Honestly, most people in the Middle East don't like Bashar al-Assad. But ISIS also doesn't like Bashar al-Assad. And the Americans are on their way out when it comes to Syria, at least in my opinion. I hope we don't do wrong by our allies there, but that's the direction it vaguely looks like to everybody. So if you're ISIS in Syria, or if you're ISIS in these regions where Russia's coming back and starting to do security for a lot of these African countries, fighting Russia and doing a terror attack in Russia isn't that far out or confusing to me. It's horrific, it's awful, but this matches the modus operandi of ISIS, I think, quite well, and we have yet to find any evidence tying Ukraine to it. I think this kind of reminds me a lot of the ISIS attack in Iran, where the ISIS attack happened, and everybody just seeing the spectrum of the current war they're watching between Israel and Hamas immediately was like, oh, terror attack in Iran, I bet it was the Israelis. This was an Israeli operation. When, of course, these countries have more complicated relations than just one current war that is going on in the region. Russia isn't just fighting the Ukrainians. Russia has problems with separatists in Dagestan. Russia has problems with the criminal underworld. Russia has problems with groups in Sudan. Russia has problems with groups throughout the Middle East. So I think this is just an example of people just trying to fit this puzzle piece into the one war that they know about and not the rest of the relationship Russia has with the world.
I guess you touched on a couple things I wanted to dig into, right? I guess we'll start with, I am curious to see everyone's opinion on the treatment of the alleged terrorists they captured, right? Have we all seen that video with the ear cutting off?
At least some of them.
What are some of the thoughts here we have about that, gang? What Dylan outlined his position on it, but what's everyone else's? I'm curious.
Well, it's unsurprising. I mean, Russia is a society primed to turn on itself. Before the Ukraine, the extremely illegal war of aggression that they are doing against Ukraine, their budget to basically get out their nationalistic propaganda, I believe it was like the equivalent of $130 million a year. That is tripled now. They're having to put out propaganda nonstop. They're having to keep troops in the streets. You can go to jail for just simply, uh, you know, uh, sharing a New York Times article critiquing Putin on social media. They are having to, it's a country that is about to destroy itself. So it is not surprising to me that Putin, whose only move is being an inept strongman, which is ironic because he's so incredibly incompetent, has to look like a big tough guy and torture these people. I don't condone it, but I'm also not surprised. This is Putin's only move. And if you're going to be a terrorist, this is the fate that I think you should be unsurprised by if you are doing it against Russia.
Any other thoughts?
Um,
I mean, just one last thing. I just want to say that as a standard, this is bad when anybody does it. It was bad when we tortured people at Abu Ghraib. It was bad when anybody else tortures anybody else and does this type of thing. Like, as a standard, we have to make it so people, while under detainment, at least in America, I'm not Russian, right? But this is what I think the system is better, is
Yeah.
that they're treated well so that we know we didn't get anything under duress, and that we know that everyone while under detainment are going to be treated by a certain humanitarian standard. The Russians have obviously failed to that goal. I don't think they were particularly trying to hit that goal in the first place. They haven't hit the goal ever, in my opinion. But again, like, these guys are scum of the earth, but as a standard as how a society should conduct itself, no, it's bad. They're not the only country to do it. But I also want to throw forward that even if you don't care about these guys, the type of behavior they're doing to those detained people, it's not just them. If this is taken and thrown at Ukraine, and they felt okay cutting off the ears of people, feeding it to them, and doing all this torture, if you're like, oh, Ukraine did this, it was the Ukrainians, even if there's not evidence, if you believe it, then what's going to stop you from doing that to Ukrainian POWs, which has already been reported?
Yeah,
I want
I have.
to pass the ball to 𝕬𝖏, and then I want to go to non-smoker, and then we'll see if Andrew has anything to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I mostly am gonna second what Brianna and Dylan said. I don't really care. This is nothing surprising, as Dylan said. Ukrainian POWs have suffered through things far worse. In fact, a lot of the former POWs have actually been posting like threads on Twitter where it's like, "Oh, hey, I recognize this specific torture method that they're doing." I would say that the outstanding part of all of this is that they are now like so openly promoting, like, "Yes, we did that shit." Like the channels
That's
that
right.
posted it, they're like, they are government affiliated. I guess I don't I haven't tracked exactly where all of these leaks came from, but like for instance, like most prominently, the guy that they wheeled into court like on a wheelchair in a coma with his ass out, like that's pretty clearly overboard. So they're not even like attempting to create an appearance of propriety. So I think that's what kind of really makes it kind of distinct from all of the countless other atrocities that we have seen throughout this war, is that they have just fully kind of given into this uh, I don't know, chaos. This kind of uh, you know,
Is
kind
it
of
chaos though?
yeah,
It doesn't seem chaotic. It seems purposeful,
well,
right?
okay, in the sense that like there are no more institutions in Russia. There are no more political institutions in Russia. There are no more economic institutions in Russia. There are no more like the justice system is just bullshit. When they rewrite the constitution whenever they want. So that's the thing that I guess I'm trying to carry, is that basically it's just kind of, it's like gang violence except on a scale of like an entire state where I guess uh yeah, just anything goes
Okay.
basically.
I'll pass the ball to non-smoker, and then we'll go to Mercado.
Yeah, I mean, I don't support torture, like whatsoever. In terms of, especially in terms of like being a useful method of extracting information from suspects, it's been proven to be ineffective. I mean, when people are giving statements under duress, they tend to lie because they just want you to stop fucking torturing them. So I don't think it's useful in a pragmatic sense. I think it's like obviously inhumane. I also think it's a routine way that suspects of like crimes of this nature are often dealt or treated with. I mean, it's hard for me to though hear like about what I'm kind of taking from like Brianna, and I forget the other guy's name, Alucard, or I think it was Alucard. Yeah. feeling like this sort of notion of like this being like a Russian kind of like a specific or particular Russian method. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, I just got through researching for the radio show, like this whole article about 𝕵𝖎𝖎, like this Pakistani national who was, illegally detained in the UK and then extradited to the US and was essentially tortured and imprisoned for like 20 fucking years. And it turned out he was like totally innocent. Like this is, and sadly becomes standard practice on how, nations, first world nations deal with terrorists or terror suspects. And it's fucked up and wrong and terrible and all that shit. But it's kind of routine procedure. Can you guys imagine what would have happened if we caught any of the immediate conspirators behind 9/11, like within a day of the attacks, how they would have been treated? I mean, I'm sure they would have been tortured. I mean, just look at, the Abu Ghraib and all of the torture that we did participate in the subsequent years to 9/11 with that as a rationalization. Look what they did to us. Let's get them back. So I think it's.
I gotta push back on you, man. I gotta
one at a time.
There's a shocker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can go first, Brianna. It's fine.
So look, respectfully, and I don't want to get into this, but America's excesses during the Bush years are not the subject here, and I think it's off topic, and we should not go there.
Yeah, it's torture.
Secondly,
It's
hold
exactly
on, I'm
related
finish
to
my
it.
point. I'm going to finish my point. The second thing I want to say is I think it is almost, you don't have to go to the same place the insane left goes, where everything that happens, the answer is America sucks and America is evil.
But you don't
I
have
get
to
enough
deny
of
that
that
you can
shit.
reference
I
America,
get
too.
enough of that shit from communist Twitter.
No, you
don't need to
can't
do
handle any of that
Wait,
shit.
can you
Any
please-
criticism
hold
of
on,
the U.S.
please
is
moderate?
totally baseless and
Gang,
unfair.
gang,
Can you
gang,
please
gang. But all of you, please. Right?
Let me finish my point. Thank you.
Briefly,
So-
and then we gotta some back and forth.
Wait,
and we-
clarifying question. Was that a you general or you specifically to Brianna?
Brianna.
Okay.
Although you do that too.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
Everybody
Okay,
progressive
let's
victory
hold on.
related.
Let's give Brianna the ball for a minute.
Let me finish my point.
Hail
Thank you.
Obama.
My
Was
point
that on the
is,
PowerPoint presentation this month?
Okay,
can
enough,
you please
enough.
shut the fuck up? Thank you.
No.
So, America is a democracy. We have a procedure to actually punish people that engage in torture and go through the process. There are people that ended up in prison from that. If you watch the hearings, we actually had congressional hearings on this where there was accountability. That does not exist in Russia. This is off topic. It's a frankly stupid point, and I would like to talk about ISIS-K and the actual topic that we showed up today for.
Yeah, sounds like it's inconvenient for you to hear like comparisons between what America does and what Russia does.
Yeah.
And you feel
America sucks.
Okay,
I got
hold on.
Yeah,
Brianna, stop.
It's
You gotta let him finish too.
Like this is classic fucking Brianna Wu. It's amazing. But anyway, I understand that people don't like that reductionist thinking of like America does bad, so blah blah blah. All I'm trying to say is this is a routine way that terrorists and suspects of terrorism are dealt with, which is unfortunate and wrong. I'm not condoning it. But what I'm saying, it's not exclusively a Russian Russian method.
No one said that.
I want to
Yep.
pass the
Well, I
ball.
felt you were.
I want to pass the ball to Andrew, who has not had
Wait,
a
I thought it
chance
was.
yet.
I let Brianna go first.
Oh, you
Didn't
like?
I?
Did
I'm
you want
just here.
something to say? Okay.
Yeah,
but-
I'm gonna what Dylan and Brianna had said, right? Like it's a culture of Russia, right? We see it. It happens on the front lines with how Russian soldiers treat Ukrainian POWs. I mean, it's a bigger, grander, systematic issue that isn't even being tackled. Or it's not. There isn't accountability places in to like make sure there's a humane way to go and treat these terrorists or anything like that. There, like Brianna had said, we had a whole investigation into how the United States and the military treated in Abu Ghraib. Like that already happened. So to go back to the Bush administration and to bring it to now in 2024 in Russia and how they're treating terrorists, I don't think there's a connection there.
Dylan, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say that I think that the United States, definitely after 9/11, put a lot of what we would consider, or at least I would consider, fundamental values of what should represent the United States. Freedom from government surveillance when we were surveilling certain mosques in New York City. I know if it was Eric Adams' administration that did that or Rudy Giuliani's administration did that, but whoever was the New York mayor at the time, I think the FBI was also involved. There were other like torture that we engaged in. But when it comes to Abu Ghraib, that was covered up. That was like, this is a bad thing. We're going to keep in the corner because we don't want the world to find out that mighty Uncle Sam engaged in this behavior. And then when it was revealed, people were sentenced. Many of them were not sentenced enough. Many of them were given slapping hands on the wrist. Is anybody involved in the torture of these people that we have direct footage of them cutting off the ear, feeding him the ear? We got people going in there, have beaten to death. Is anybody even going to get a court date? Is this even something that's being discussed in Russian society? Is this something that's being discussed by the Russian legal system? If I was a Russian citizen and I submitted a complaint, but like, hey, was it okay that this person got tortured? Is it more likely that they say, you know what, we'll look into it? Or is it more likely that cops will show up at my door and say, hey, why are you so concerned about this guy being tortured? Why are you so concerned about this? I do think that there is a difference in the political culture and how these problems could be addressed between the United States and Russia. That's not to say that we are pure. Again, we engaged in Abu Ghraib when it happened. Many people on Fox News and other television programs made excuses for this by saying, hey, they're bad guys. We've seen that happen with other high-profile criminal incidents. For example, when George Floyd died, people were like, well, he wasn't a nice guy. So, maybe these types of government abuses, there are people who defend it. But this is the discussion in the United States. That can't even be a discussion over in Russia. It's not allowed.
Yeah, I want to give a non-smoker a
difference.
chance to respond if he wants.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little perplexed at that reply. Like, in terms of like the cover up of Abu Ghraib, like to me, the cover up is worse than the fucking crime. Like it's almost worse that kind of shit is going on behind closed doors and then it's revealed. But I guess my point is sort of being lost.
That's
here,
worse than being
which is-
openly like,
all right.
we can
No,
torture, that's
you don't go
okay?
ahead. You fucking unbelievable. You guys are unbelievable.
I'm very unbelievable.
I know. Yeah, you're really just something else, dude.
Yeah.
I couldn't hear your question. What was it?
Maybe if okay, my question was like there is a.
So anyway,
do you
like
really
I was saying,
think it's worth,
the issue that I was trying to address.
I'll mute him on my side so I can just talk over him the whole time.
Okay. Both of you shut up so I can hear.
Okay.
Non-smoker was going. I want non-smoker to finish his point, and then we can interrogate.
Well, what if I don't want him to finish this point because I just don't like him?
You know what? It's okay. It's okay.
Well, you
I
have
get
fucking 4 other panelists who agree with you, dude. You can deal with some dissenting opinion.
Non-smoker is.
Oh no, I
here
can
to
deal
provide
with it.
Progressive
the same way I
Victory's
can deal
meeting
with
later
AIDS.
is
I
on
can take
Zoom. I'm
medication
sure you
for it.
guys
I
can
can
have
do
your
all types of
fucking
things to
circle
help.
jerk there.
You want to get involved in the circle jerk?
Not.
No, dude, you can pay me with the fucking. You couldn't.
I
at
promise-
this point, I
$20.
wouldn't go into that
I'm
circle
saying-
You
jerk.
promise
can't
not
touch
to
my
tell
penis,
anyone
okay?
about the circle jerk, Dylan. How dare you
Okay,
betray
I'm
our
sorry.
trust?
Hey, yo, non-smoker, you take rules?
I'll keep that reserved.
Okay, let's go to non-smoker. Non-smoker is here because we do want differing perspectives here. Non-smoker, please finish your point.
Obviously, you do. Yeah. No. Okay. So look, just the general argument here is that it's not okay to torture people like this. I don't think it's an effective means of extracting information, which is the whole benefit of arresting them, right? I also think there's. I guess what I'm trying to get to is that there's a certain grim reality. Like in war and in conflict, and when you capture people like this who recently just sprayed down a bunch of fucking civilians, there's a very high probability that they're not going to get the nicest treatment from their captors. Now, I do think that, cutting someone's fucking ear off and feeding it to them is, a little beyond what I would say is like, roughing up a suspect. So, yes, it's brutal, it's bad. What I'm just saying is we always fall into this trap where it's like, oh, this is an exclusively Russian thing. And that's just bullshit. And it serves as a rationale to like other this people who are just they're another nation, they're another people, they conduct themselves the way they conduct themselves. It may not be the way that it's up to our standards or whatever. I don't necessarily think they're any more exclusively brutal than we are personally. And I've yet to hear like a compelling argument to the contrary of that.
So I just I'll be done. I swear I'll never open my Yankee red, white, and blue love and mouth again. Okay, but I just want to throw out there a few things. The first thing is, I don't believe that there's anything inherent about Russia or inherent about Russians specifically. Like they're born and they're just like, I feel like some ear today. I don't think that's a thing. I think that there's a certain political culture that develops in different societies, especially if that society can close off its information space and try to block out opposing ideas that make it difficult for you to challenge certain political norms like normalized violence that does not necessarily exist in other societies. Like, if you would have placed the same political conditions in the United States, you could get Americans to do something very similar. I don't think there's anything inherent about Americans or Russians that does this. I do think there is something special about, not special as in it's the only one that's like it, but special as in it's different than other countries. And there's some countries that do this as well, about Russian political violence that normalizes this and makes it so that they can, like, soldiers can release guides to torture Ukrainian soldiers, like the head of 𝕵𝖎𝖎 did, and there's no repercussions. He can release that guide to torture, publicize it, push it, and he still can serve as long as he wants to until he wants to drop out.
Yeah.
Can I ask a
Rick, can
question
I
quick?
ask I was going to ask Andrew a question if I could. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's go to that, and then I do have a question for myself to maybe move this along. But
Sure.
go ahead, Brianna.
So, Andrew, I was so happy looking at your Twitter today, and that's really well said, Dylan, because, you know, you're a Republican, and I saw that we shared a lot of the same values, specifically about counterterrorism. So I think one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today, and hoping we can find some bipartisan agreement on, I don't know if you saw how DHS responded to the ISIS-K attack on Russia, but they went on the Sunday morning talk shows and put out some statements, putting out some credible ways that ISIS-K could actually strike the homeland. To just catch people up on this. You know, obviously I supported Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan. It was the longest war in American history. We needed to move on, though it's very hard to see the Taliban like take over and what is happening to women there. But one of the consequences of that is our intelligence gathering methods have obviously decreased, and it's made it very difficult to identify terrorists to stop them from getting over our borders. So, you know, the Republicans right now, I think very correctly, are concerned about our situation on the southern border. And one of the things DHS came out and said is that this problem with intelligence sharing, because our information capabilities have shrunk so much as the, you know, basically the Afghan and other relationships with other countries have shot down, you know, it really makes it imperative for us to address this border crisis. So I was wondering if you agreed with that, if you thought that maybe looking at this would be a good opportunity for us to get this legislation through the Senate.
For the specific border bill?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, it could be. From my experience down at the U.S. southern border, because I went down there and talked to the sheriff down there. I went down there and talked to some of the local politicians down there. I was trying to get Dylan to go with me on the next time. But
I'll
the
get in
issue,
with you. That sounds
yeah,
great.
you want to come down? I'll bring down as many
Okay.
because it was my.
We'll party.
I gotta know, Wick, because you want to talk about this on Wednesday, don't you?
Yeah,
Little
that's
bit more.
Wednesday's
Yeah.
topic. I
We're
wanna
gonna talk about it again.
focus mostly on the
Apologies.
Ukraine
Yes.
stuff today.
I'm ready though,
please.
Wick. I'm ready for it. I'll
Yeah,
wait, then
but
we'll go back.
answer briefly if you'd like, and then I do
Yeah,
want to get
so-
back on track, please.
How about this then? I will give you my answer on the Wednesday panel. There you go.
Fair enough.
You'll have to tune in.
There you go.
You
You have to tune in.
You wanted to ask a question on Smoker, but I do have a question after yours, so go ahead.
Yeah, no, I wanted to know from it's actually for Dylan. Dylan, I'm just curious, how would you compare the treatment of these terrorists by the Russian security forces to like 𝕾𝖍𝖎?
Well, I'd say we have evidence of these guys getting tortured. We don't have any evidence of 𝕾𝖍𝖎 getting tortured, so I'd say that's probably the main sticking point. Oh, also, 𝕾𝖍𝖎 didn't take a machine gun and mow down a bunch of people.
No, I know. That it makes it all the more interesting that he died in Ukrainian custody under suspicious circumstances, no?
No,
No.
You don't think so?
I don't know
Did you
why.
see his health? Did you see his how he carried himself? How many cigarettes he smoked a day?
Look,
So-
I can give you my position on 𝕾𝖍𝖎. I don't think he should have died. I think he was
No.
probably like one of the biggest knuckle draggers that had ever touched Ukrainian soil. I don't think he should have died. I think Ukraine probably should have just deployed him in his underwear or something. I don't know. But it sucks that he died, but we don't know the circumstances behind his death, whereas we do know, because we have footage of a guy getting his ear cut off and put in his mouth, which, you know, he thought was at least slightly problematic, which 𝕾𝖍𝖎 said that he had needles stuck into his eyes, but he said he didn't have any evidence of it because all the evidence had been done, all the torture had been done in a way which you don't have evidence of. So it's all up
At
to
least
his
it was in
word
the
whether or
ear.
not he had been tortured.
Okay.
Wait, so do you
Right.
believe that he did have needles stuck in his eye? Just
Dude,
based on his
no,
word
listen,
alone, or-
I'm honestly, Dylan, the one thing I can say about you is that you're fairly honest on like the details of this stuff. No, I have no evidence. I have no evidence
Yeah,
whatsoever. That he was
that's
tortured.
the main
He
difference.
died
Like,
in
if
Ukrainian
there was
custody,
evidence that he
though,
had been
under
tortured,
suspicious circumstances, and I would say it's a reasonable conclusion to draw that probably his death had something to do with the way he was treated.
Okay. I want to kind of maybe get us back on track just a little bit. I know we got all sorts of places we want to go, and I know there's a lot of threads that the Ukrainian and Russian conflict kind of spreads into. I wanted to ask you all your opinion on the recent leaks about the White House telling Ukrainians or asking Ukrainians not to strike at certain targets within Russia, namely Russian oil refineries and other energy targets like that. Do we think that the U.S. is overstepping in that? Do we think that there are valid concerns with Ukrainian attacks on Russian civilians? We know over the weekend, for example, Russia launched 90 missiles into Ukrainian cities and things like that. Are Ukrainians not allowed to respond in kind? But then again, oil refineries are worked by civilians. Is there not a valid concern for civilian casualties against these targets? What are our thoughts here? We'll go to 𝕬𝖎𝖙 first. He hasn't said a lot, and then we'll open it up, please.
Okay, so just to clarify real quick, so in that question, do you consider like oil refineries to be civilian targets?
No, I think they're valid military targets, but
Yep.
there are ways to minimize civilian casualties. I'm not up to date with exactly how Ukrainians are going about striking these targets. I don't know, but I'm just curious about your position on the White House specifically, or the U.S. Asking Ukrainians not to do it.
So I think the strikes are awesome. You can see the videos for a lot of them. It's basically like a bullseye strike directly into like the refining tower. I don't know that have been any civilian casualties associated with that at all.
Fair enough.
But on the White House position, it's stupid. It's as stupid as it has ever been, which is very unfortunate. They don't seem to learn from kind of all of the past 2 years of waffling about escalation or whatever. Yeah, I think they were talking about like retaliation, which is like, are you kidding me? We're 2 years into this thing. Like, and like, why is only Russia ever like an entity that is allowed to retaliate? Why is this not an option that is ever entertained for Ukraine? So yes, I think that the White House's position is profoundly stupid. And insofar as kind of, I think you said, should Ukraine be allowed to respond in kind to strikes on civilian targets? No, I don't think you should bomb civilians in response to bombing civilians. I think it's kind of the regular. It's the same approach that you would kind of take in any other self-defense case. You take the minimally necessary steps to eliminate the threat. The civilians are not the threat. So I think, in the event that Ukraine were to start deliberately mowing down civilians, I would, of course, not support that. But thus far, that is not something that has occurred. And I do not view it as a serious concern in the slightest.
Okay, other
So
thoughts?
so
I
when so
think
when it comes
it's.
to the
Oh, go
oh,
ahead.
Let's go to Andrew, and then we'll
all
go
right.
to Brianna. Yeah.
Yeah, so when it comes to that Financial Times article, I call into question the validity of the sourcing on it because they used unnamed, like the sources are not even known. Ukraine officials actually came out and denied that completely and said that the U.S. never even told us to stop hitting refineries. So a lot of, at least on the Ukrainian side of things, they're not even they're denying that entirely. But in the course of the war, I think Ukraine's been very good about not hitting civilian targets. They're not targeting civilians. I mean, they've been limited to not even target inside of Russia until like this year, when Ukraine came out and said that, hey, we're going to start targeting inside of Russian territory, hit some of these critical targets, or like oil infrastructure, critical infrastructure that Russia uses to fuel their military and further the invasion into Ukraine. So I fully support Ukraine continuing to hit these targets. I'm not even worried about them targeting civilians because that's just
Sure.
not what
Do
Ukraine
you
does, and that's just what they've
just
been
to
doing.
interrogate that for a moment, then I want to let other people go. Do you not worry perhaps that this might be a form of escalation, right? That this might simply make the conflict more well, escalation is probably the best word to use. Yeah. Do you not worry that this is
Yeah.
a form of escalation?
No, Ukraine's got to do what they have to do to stop the Russian invasion. Right? They got to protect their sovereign integrity of their borders, and that also includes these bases. I'm hoping that they start hitting the airfields, the air bases. The fact that you can be in Ukraine and you get an alert on your phone saying, "Hey, there's a bomber taking off from Kursk airfield heading towards Kyiv now," and that thing isn't being taken out or that airfield isn't being destroyed. I'm actually I'm like what Dylan said earlier. I wish we were doing more to support Ukraine, more targets inside of Russian territory territory that will actually stop the Russians from furthering their aggression inside of Ukraine.
And when you say we, do you mean just the Ukrainians in general, or do you mean that something like the NATO or U.S. forces getting involved?
It's Ukraine, the Ukrainian armed forces, with the support of what we can do from
Fair enough.
from our end.
So,
Yep.
So-
Brianna, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm always really torn on these kinds of intelligence leaks just because, I think, just to give people a little bit of catch up, the U.S. Embassy put out an alert basically 2 weeks before this attack, alerting United States citizens to stay out of the populated areas in Russia. Just
The
because
Russian terror attack, to be clear, right?
That's correct, with the Russian terror attack. So, I think it's really easy for us to sit here and armchair general this, just because the United States does have really advanced intelligence capabilities to determine this stuff. Maybe there's a calculus behind the scenes I just don't understand, but I can make an educated guess. So just like giving the caveat that I don't want to second guess our intelligence agencies, it seems generally speaking that the United States has tried to fence sit this war. We've done things like decide to not provide air support to kind of tread this middle ground. And it seems like we think that we can just kind of stay neutral and ask everyone to play nice. I actually think Ukraine, I think it's a completely legitimate military target. Note anyone that's on the Israel-Palestine side, like things like oil refineries, they are legitimate military targets, even if civilians get hurt. I'm sorry to tell that to you. So my instinct is to give Ukraine support to conduct the war the way that they seem fit, and taking out Russian power and oil capabilities seems makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay. Non-smoker, go ahead, and then I want to hear Dylan's thoughts. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not in a position to challenge the veracity of the report. I don't know if it's good intel or not, but let's assume it is, right? Just for the sake of the question. Look, is the U.S. overstepping its bounds? There's no war if the U.S. isn't supporting Ukraine. This is all guided by the U.S. So, of course, they're going to determine the level to which Ukraine does and doesn't attack Russian targets. And, the U.S. has very real economic concerns regarding the price of oil. That's been an issue since the start of this conflict. And, it's managed to, level back down. And, that's the kind of thing that the average American, especially approaching an election, gets really, really, really upset about, is the price of oil, the price of, gasoline and things like that. So, it doesn't surprise me whatsoever, and I don't think Ukraine has any ability to fucking do anything about it. If the U.S. decides you're not going to attack this target, they kind of have to go along with what we're telling them to do. If it were, a conventional war where both sides had equal strength and, they were just fighting, on an equal 1-to-1 basis. I don't think it's an issue that Ukraine attacks oil refineries, just like Russia might attack Ukrainian oil refineries or whatever. It's a legitimate military target. It's not attacking civilians. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Dylan, go ahead.
I mean, the article was by Christopher Miller and a few other people from the Financial Times. I know that there's a lot of people in the Ukraine space that doesn't like Christopher Miller due to previous reporting he's done on the war. But I remember the Zaluzhny story, and a lot of people had to eat crow after Christopher Miller came out and said, yeah, no, it looks like Zaluzhny's going and Sirski's coming in. And a lot of people said, oh, it's Christopher Miller, it's bullshit, it's nonsense, and then Zaluzhny stepped down. So we cannot just dismiss it, in my opinion, because of either anonymous sources or it being Christopher Miller, and a lot of people don't like Christopher Miller. I think there's a decent chance that the American government did say it. I don't know for sure. I'm just saying we shouldn't dismiss Christopher Miller's work, even if you don't like the guy's work personally. And it wasn't just him, it was 3 other Financial Times journalists. So it's not just him putting his reputation on the line, it's 3 other Financial Times journalists that would also be putting their name on the line, and the Financial Times itself. Not saying it's impossible, it's journalists have got it wrong about the war before. I'm just saying that we shouldn't dismiss it, in my opinion, at face value. As for the idea that Ukraine won't have any ability to if America tells them to, if the report is real, then the Ukrainians are already ignoring us. Because since the report's been released, and since we supposedly had this conversation, which the report says happened like 3 or 4 times, so it wasn't one time the American government tried to get them to stop, it would be multiple times. they're still striking oil refineries. They struck like another oil refinery like a day, 2 days ago
Yesterday.
after the report came out. Yeah, yesterday. And they're probably going to continue to strike them because they've taken out 10% of Russia's oil producing capacity. And there is more oil refineries in range in Western European Russia that could still be targeted. And we've seen the Ukrainians go from 250 kilometer drones to like 1,250 kilometer drones. So there's a good chance that these attacks won't only be constrained to European Russia, they might go deeper into Russia. And my opinion is, while I'm against the idea of telling them to stop, period, if you're gonna sanction the Russians because you want to undercut their budget, then you should also, maybe go after the industries that are mainly financing the war itself. But also, I do want to throw out there that if we're blocking aid since September, we're making a new deal on aid. This is a particularly weird moment leverage-wise for us to start pressuring them to stop blowing up their airfields. It's like, okay, we're going to give you nothing, and also don't blow up their airfields. I just also think that would make us look like a bad ally, which is part of the reason why I think the leak would, if true, if confirmed, would be embarrassing for the American government.
Well, that's another question, right? Are we a bad ally? Has America been a bad ally to Ukraine in the last?
Yes.
Yeah, since
somewhat. It's complicated. I think it's a complicated. I think it's more
time.
complicated. People give it credit for.
Do you want anyone
Started
to
off-
elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, I feel like we started off great with a lot of words and support, and that people still. Lloyd Austin went there recently, or it was in December, or January, I believe. Hey, we're here to the very end, and now here we are. I mean, it's just going to fall back into internal U.S. political debates, I think. But so I'm trying to keep it away from that. But it falls back to what's happening inside of the U.S. government and the Congress, and not getting this aid through, and then double downing on the reasons why, and then people get lost in it. And I feel like it's just not. We're at a point where the U.S. allyship to Ukraine is mid at best now. Or if worse.
It's a real failure of leadership by Biden. He's my president, and I will work very hard to get him elected. But it's very disappointing that he has not been able to wrangle Congress into doing this. Again, Ukraine is trying to prevent World War III. The stakes are very, very high.
If I may, I mean, I think like bad
Please,
ally.
and then non-smoker looks like he wants to comment, but go ahead, 𝕬𝖏.
Yeah,
please.
I think that's kind of not like the language that we usually use. I would say that it's at the very least kind of an imperfect ally for sure. I think there has been a lot of celebration of what's been going on the liberal side, and people saying that Biden has handled everything perfectly, and so I think that's a kind of big problem, and there is kind of a ton of critiques um, that can be leveled against the Biden administration. I guess I would not jump all the way to say that like the United States, especially because as people have said, like a lot of this, I guess I don't want to condemn like the country of the United States, but specific people within the U.S. government, I think are fair game, and I think we should kind of focus more of our efforts towards critiquing them, and most importantly, pushing Biden more towards the correct position on this issue, because unfortunately, we are not getting an alternative anytime soon.
I call it trickle down weapon systems, bro. Like why giving little bits of like little, here you go, a Ukraine, here's like literally 12 Abrams. Like what are they gonna do with that, right? So I feel like Dylan nailed it on the head. We need like 100 billion to Ukraine. They need more weapons.
Hell yeah.
I'm gonna go get tea, and I know non-smoker wants to go. I'll be right back.
Yeah, go ahead, non-smoker.
Yeah, man. Well, I'd say we've been a terrible ally this whole time. I mean, this is never, you guys are crazy. This has never been about protecting Ukraine. It's never been about that. This is about depleting Russia's military capacity. And this is a subsidy for weapons manufacturers. That's all it's ever been. And maybe with the faint hope that we would get Ukraine into NATO and have, this friendly power right on the border of Russia. That was our whole desire in this region from jump. It's never been about helping Ukrainians or doing what's best for Ukrainians. It's led to a 2-year protracted conflict, which could have been resolved, a month or so in, and is instead going to result in Ukraine losing a fairly significant amount of territory. And, at a minimum, tens of thousands, it's hard to get reliable casualty count. But at a minimum, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians fucking dead. It's been a catastrophe. And, you guys are like shocked that we're not giving enough weapons or like sufficient weapons or effective enough weapons. That's of no surprise to me whatsoever. The way this works is these weapons manufacturers offload their old shit and, send it to Ukraine. And then we give them boatloads of fucking money. It's a fucking scam. It's a racket. It always has been.
Responses?
Did
My
we
turn, I
show
think?
up to
Yeah.
talk about Russia? Because
Definitely.
that's the topic I studied
Literally.
for. I don't know why we're going into this.
Well,
Russia, do you look to Russia at all as like responsible for the invasion, like at all? Like,
Yeah, no,
military-
totally. I think you can absolve Putin of actually invading in 2022, and there's like certainly various critiques you can make against him. For this even being necessary whatsoever. One, two, the notion that this is somehow to give Putin like some sort of legitimate, standing in the eyes of more hardliners in Russia, which is, it's similar to a Netanyahu dynamic. I think that like a wartime, leader has more support, even though there has been, opposition to the war in Russia domestically. Putin is, supported. The war is supported, by a majority of Russians. I think that, I would have hoped for a much more, how would you say, like neutral, resolution to this, without there needing to be any kind of military engagement whatsoever. But I think we also did back Russia into a corner with the advancement of NATO over the last 20 years and, refusing essentially to have like any sort of cooperative relationship with the Russians and combating global terrorism, ironically, considering what the main topic here is. So I
what
don't know.
about
Yeah, I mean, I think there's blame to be shared all the way around.
Okay,
so go ahead, Dylan. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Dylan's
so
got it.
I think the original question, if we were a bad ally or not, I'm going to give, so before we move on to, I think we're moving on a little bit from that, or we're moving on to whether he should have been an ally to begin with. But being a bad ally, I think that, and I'm going to give a little bit of, I guess, I live in the DC area, okay, I'll use some of the Fed in my blood, to advocate. There is an argument to be made that after how the Ukrainians performed in 2014, now it isn't completely due to their own fault. I think part of it was the Obama administration encouraging them to basically let go of Crimea. But when the war started in 2014, there were not a lot of effective Ukrainian soldiers. And a lot of people had to plug holes with basically militia that had gathered as street protesters, like street defense groups during the Euromaidan. There were other groups like football clubs and other people who came together, local communities, villagers, they all came together and fought that. And if you're in the American military and that's your experience with Ukraine, even with the 8 years that happened between then and the 2022 invasion, there is going to be a lot of lingering worry about, well, this might all end in a month. And if we give them F-16s, we give them HIMARS, we give them this, we give them that, we give them these high-tech defense systems we don't want the Russians to get their hands on, well, then the Russians got their hands on it. And not only did Ukraine fall, but now the Russians have more intelligence about American weapons, more intelligence, humiliating for us, especially after the withdrawal from Afghanistan. All those weapons are getting taken by the Taliban. And now our weapons are getting taken by the Russians back to back during the Biden administration. And so while I don't think necessarily we should have been as slow as we were, I think we should have been quicker in getting the supplies. That at least is the perspective of the American government. That is what I think. That's why I think they slowed down the MiGs. Now, that's one of the reasons. The other reason is escalation management. They knew that if they did one big package, like we're going to do the $200 billion, one big package right at the start, then that would be a point where the Russians could escalate off of. Like, if you approve that package, we will do this. But if you slowly go up, then you don't create any clear line where the Russians can stand here and say, this is the point of escalation. If it's 5 artillery guns, then it's 6 artillery guns, then it's 7 artillery guns. Well, do you really want to risk a nuclear incident when it was 6 artillery guns last week and 7 artillery guns this week? And it allows the Biden administration, Jake Sullivan, Anthony Blinken, to ease into supporting Ukraine in a way that they feel is more comfortable when it comes to Russia's nuclear stockpile. Again, not necessarily defending it at every point, merely explaining their position, because there's nobody else in here that will explain the position. As for the idea of whether we should have supported Ukraine, we got the peace deal that was leaked recently due to the reporting of some fantastic local Ukrainian journalists, the Kiev Independent and others, and I think it was the Wall Street Journal. And the deal that we saw that was being negotiated, that was talked about publicly, there were some elements that you would expect, like annexation of this territory, that territory. But a big thing that I think is notable that people don't give enough attention is that the Russians wanted the Ukrainian armed forces to be 80,000 men. Now, mind you, the Ukrainians started the war with about 250 to 300,000 men. They're fighting the war now between 800,000 to 1 million men. Now, if you're the leader of a country and your neighbor country has invaded you again and again and then violated treaties you signed saying you wouldn't invade them if you gave up your nuclear stockpile, and you make these treaties and you have over 200 rounds of negotiation, 20 negotiated ceasefires, and then they say, how about you give us all your guns and we promise for realsies this time, pinky swear, unlike the other 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, we promise this time we won't invade. Any national leader that would agree under those circumstances would be in a very difficult position, not only for themselves, but for their country. Not only would they probably be politically dead, but also the country might be, well, nationally dead when it comes to at least its defense policy. So yeah, I do think if that's the deal the Ukrainians were being offered at the start, it makes sense that they went to the West, who agreed to defend them if their territory was infringed upon, and said, support us. And we said, okay.
I do got to give Smoker an out. He has a radio show he has to attend. So, Smoker, can you tell people where they can find you if they want to find you? We're going to continue the discussion, of course, but I just wanted to give him that courtesy. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's twitch.tv/non-smoker. Appreciate the time with everybody, even though, I was a little bit on my own here, feeling a little ganged up, but that's okay. Hope you have a fun circle jerk without me. Fuck progressive victory. See you later.
Oh, his poor fifis. We were too mean, Wick.
Well,
Wick, can I just, for the
to.
record, can we write down somewhere that non-smoker had a very cool, badass, and edgy outro, just for the record?
For the record, noted for the record. And
thank you, noted for the record.
Noted for the record. And to be clear, gang, just because everyone gets mad at me if I don't tell everyone this every single fucking stream, I do get a check from Progressive Victory. I believe Dylan also gets a check for Progressive Victory.
Oh
Shocking,
my
I know.
God.
I'm paid by the
I
big
gotta
E.
go.
Oh,
I gotta
man.
go. This is unethical. Oh my God.
I would like a check from Progressive Victory too.
Sure.
I'm still waiting on George Soros
Just
to pay
sign
me.
up for WooBucks.
I'm still
We'll hook
waiting
you up.
for Mossad to get me a check
we
too,
get a raise?
right? Like,
There we go.
they're paying
There we
everyone
go.
else. Why not me? But I do want to like interrogate this a little bit, right? This idea of at what point, if any, do we decide that, okay, this isn't coming to an end, this is continuing to go back and forth in a stalemate, and it's vicious. And again, like, again, they hit the dam recently, like over the weekend. Russia hit the dam, 90 cruise missiles into the various cities and things like that. It's a problem. Is there a point where other countries, aside from Ukraine, step in and be like, okay, gang, maybe it's time to come to the table, right? Maybe it's time to talk. What do we think on that? Go ahead.
Are you asking, like, in terms
Just
of
in general,
predicting what will happen or what ought to be done?
what ought to? What do you ought? What? Well, I'm curious about both questions now. Actually, what do you think will happen? What is the most likely occurrence? And what do you think ought to happen? Right? Like, in what scenario would you, Alucard, right? You're Ukrainian. In what scenario would you be like, okay, well, we're gonna have to talk peace? Are you a to the last man kind of guy, or are you? Is there a line before that you would say, okay, we're not gonna win here, we have to sue for peace?
Well, I guess it depends on kind of what direction Russia continues to trend in, because right now we're kind of heading rapidly towards kind of like Nazi Germany territory, where it just seems like where it's just war crimes galore. Like I see kind of any redeeming feature of Russia is very rapidly disappearing before our eyes. But in terms of where I think Ukraine should pursue negotiations, and the kind of the point where maybe I guess other countries should push Ukraine to pursue negotiations, would be something like the Korean War, which I think sometimes people kind of bring up as an example of kind of a good compromise. I think what's his face, Stephen Kotkin or whatever, the historian guy, brings that up as like winning the peace for the South Koreans, which I have big problems with that. But so basically, what happened there is that you had the entire UN fight and South Korea fight the North Koreans, who had the Chinese fighting alongside them with the armed support from the USSR. And so after 3 years of all-out fighting, and they couldn't, and with all of those forces, and they where every single North Korean city was bombed into dust, and they could not move the front line anyway. And then they signed the armistice agreement, and we've been there ever since. So I think if we are if we reach that level of commitment, that level of expenditures, and the front line is still not moving, I'd be like, okay, guys, you know, yeah, you did your best for real. I respect that. But if we're at the current situation where U.S. support for Ukraine is like, I think, like 0.16% of GDP annualized, I will never ever respect the United States just saying, "Oh, well, it's just a stalemate." Wait, no, it's not. You yourself can end this. You can win this if you just, do kind of even things you have already done historically. You can do this yourself. You just choose not to. And so I guess from, maybe some other countries, like let's say if Estonia just says, okay, guys, we've given you everything we had, it's okay, we can move on. But from the United States specifically, I don't think I could ever respect such a call to kind of negotiate and settle.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the rest of you? What are your thoughts on this?
I think the political reality is the future of Ukraine is primarily going to be decided by the 2024 election. No disrespect to you, Andrew, but there is a very strong anti-Ukraine faction in your party that seems ascendant. And to be frank, this Israel-Palestine debate has really made it harder for even Democrats to get consensus about military support. I don't know the precise millimeter shell, but there's right now we have certain military resources that both Israel and Ukraine are vying for to basically push the front lines and keep them there. So I think the unfortunate political reality is people like me, Democratic operatives, really need to get out there and make sure that Joe Biden wins so we can support Ukraine. But even that's not assured because are we going to keep the Senate and the House? The Senate's going to be a really tough battle this time around. Are the Republicans going to be in the mood, those old school Republicans that understand the value of national security? Are they going to be in the mood to pass a funding round for Ukraine? My God, I hope so. But if they're not, things dissolve really quickly for Ukraine. Russia can push that front line. I'm sure they'll keep the territory that they've got, and it may be that Ukraine is forced to come to the table. That's not the outcome I want, but I think that's the unfortunate political reality.
Okay. What are your thoughts, Andrew and Dylan, please?
Yeah. Well, right now where I'm at, I'm pretty much done engaging with the Republican Party for like the last 4 years. Just kind of atrophied out of it. There's no redeemable anything within that. So I've been trying to advocate, like for example, I went to Congress to talk about the supplemental funding bill and the expedited F-16 training and the ATACMS, and we went there with Razom from Ukraine, and I talked to my own representatives from Minnesota, both at the House and the Senate. Republicans had no interest, none, or the ones that did. Tom Emmer's office met with us in the hallway, and it was so loud you couldn't even hear. And his little aide was sitting there with their arms crossed. We just don't want it to be a blank check to Ukraine. So, and I was like, oh my God, it's not. And then it was kind of done with. But the Democrat side of things, we had full conversations. We sat down. They took notes. They were asking us things. They had a defense, one of the Department of Defense representative with 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙 office and a couple others. So it was a really good experience on that. So like Brianna said, I feel like, being a former Republican, I'm trying to get to people that are currently Republicans and are still trying to be within that, to be like, yo, like, where's the national security view? Where's the the supporting our allies? Where did all of this go? Because it seems that it's just going all to Donald Trump right now, and it's coming from the top down, and he's not even in a position of power.
In talking to friends and things that are still on the right, do you think that this is something the hesitancy to support Ukraine financially, is it coming from the top down, or do you think that it's more and more of just a standard kind of the foot soldier Republican kind of feel here? What are your
It's
thoughts?
coming. It's coming from both. I think it's coming from top down messaging from Trump down, and then podcast, red pill stuff. Like I was all involved in this stuff, so I kind of know how it works back in the day when I was all watching all of these shows and all of these things. So it comes down from like media people and like trying to say, hey, the reason why life sucks for you right now, and why you can't afford groceries, and why you can't pay your gas bills because of Ukraine, and that's why. And that's there's no deeper meaning to it. They don't explain it. They don't even try to give why they're saying this. It's like they're just putting a blanket on Ukraine. Like I went out on a date like a couple weeks ago, and this woman was Republican, and she was like, "You support Ukraine?" Because she saw my Ukraine wristband. She said, "Oh, I don't like that country." I'm like, "Why not?" Like we don't. It's like, why not? Because all my money's going there. I can't afford groceries, and all my money's going to Ukraine. I'm like, oh my goodness. So
it ruined your date. That's kind of.
I mean, she came out. I wasn't even gonna talk about it. I wasn't even gonna mention any politics, but she brought it up. So I was like, and I don't really talk to her anymore, obviously. But
Probably whack pussy
it's
anyway.
just. It was like, yeah, I'm not. It comes from the top down, but also, like I had reiterated, it comes from these media personalities and podcasts that give these narratives to people to then take and believe as their own.
So
can I bounce off that, Wick? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
You may, but because I want to know, like, at what point, right? The question was, at what point would you say, okay, this isn't working? Ukraine needs to sue for peace, right? What the aid we're giving isn't working. We've say everything you do passes, right? Everything you want, the $120 billion aid package does. Is there a point where it's just you're like, okay, this isn't working. We need to sue for peace. What do you think?
I would just go the opposite way with it and advocate for more. I mean, I don't like just after being to Ukraine and talking to Ukrainians personally. Unless you're. I don't see a coming to the table to make peace to give this land up, and that's I take this because I talk to Ukrainians directly there, and settling for a peace deal in which they give land to Russia. They've already done it. They've already done Donbass and Crimea in 2014, where they signed the deal so no further aggressions, and it's already been thrown back into their face. And now we have the full-scale invasion. So I'm going to go off of what I've learned from Ukrainians, and that's we're not going to give up no matter what. Like we're not going to capitulate or give up any land.
Okay.
So that's the Ukrainian mindset right now. And if that changes, then I might have a different opinion. But I'm going to go off of what Ukrainians are telling me.
Noted.
Yeah.
If you wanted to piggyback off that, Brianna?
Andrew, I wanted to bounce off what you were saying, because I think this is really true. I think there is a exhaustion in the country. I think a lot of people took the wrong lesson from the Bush years, which, to be clear, were two wars we should not have been engaged in. Though Afghanistan started with a good mission, it quickly grew into a quagmire. I think that the American people, and what I wish my friends on the Republican side would do, is we are entering a new age of some real geo-instability. I would say there's a 1 in 3 chance we're going to be at war with China over Taiwan in the next 5 years. Ukraine, a lot of the reason people are joining NATO is because they see this instability happening through Europe for a myriad of reasons, including Iran, not just Russia. And I do think ISIS-K, this kind of regional spread of terrorism that's been outsourced by ISIS, this is going to continue to be this. So my real question for you, Andrew, is you've been in the party. How do we wake up national security Republicans? Because I think a lot about how to wake up like Democrats and to get us to understand we can't withdraw from the world.
Yeah, and I don't want Republicans to withdraw from their party. I probably changed personally, and that's my own thing. But there's obviously people that want to remain Republican, and I will support that because it's their freedom to choose what political party they want. So I'm like, okay, well then within the party, the problem is MAGA and the MAGA movement, and they understand this. That's the thing is the Reagan era Republicans, they know that MAGA is like this virus in their party, but and we have to push Republicans to push back. Like it can't come from somebody that admits that they're not Republican anymore or Democrats, because then they're just going to fall back into MAGA talking points. Oh, these are the evil Democrat, liberal, George Soros talking points trying to control you, whatever. We got to talk to non-MAGA Republicans, which I'm so glad I have so many that follow me and watch my stuff, but they need to push back against MAGA. So maybe give some of these tools that we have to the non-MAGA Republicans to then push back in it. But if they're not going to push back against MAGA, then what can you really do? If they're going to capitulate to MAGA and let that take over everything, which it already kind of is, like they took over the party entirely. Laura Trump owns the thing now, so it's we gotta advocate for these non-MAGA Republicans to push back against MAGA, in my opinion.
Okay, I want to toss the ball to Dylan to answer the question. I'm very curious.
Man, I'm just gonna reject your premise actually a little bit
Really?
here. I'm kind of gonna reject your premise. So this question assumes that the Russians are lying in wait for an opportunity to negotiate, and that if we just came to the table, that the Russians would be like, okay, you know what, fine, let's draw the line here and then we'll settle it. There's a few problems with the premise. The first thing is the Russians just lost bare minimum 17,000 dead to take of Avdiivka. That's from MERS before he shot himself in the head. After being so horrified by the numbers, and he talked a little bit too much of it, and so he got some responses from Russian state TV. That's dead. That's not even talking about injured. Avdiivka is a city of like, what, 30,000 people, just about? Something like that. If you're losing more dead and wounded taking a city than makes up the city's inhabitants, and we're not talking about Kiev, we're not talking about these big, strategically important. Avdiivka was important because of its salience, but to me, considering how well defended that is, that means the Russians are still trying to push. They're still trying to push on Kupiansk. They're still trying to push on Rabatne. They're trying to push on all these different locations. And so this question, while I don't think it's impossible that the Russians at one point, maybe not now, would want to be in a position to negotiate, this question assumes that they're in a position to negotiate. And secondly, that if we negotiated, that would be the end of the conflict. When, again, we've had 200 rounds of negotiation over, like 10 negotiated ceasefire, something like that, and none of them stopped the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So if we sit down, negotiate, and then the Russians invade again in a year after we're distracted with, say, Chinese invasion of Taiwan, and the Russians are like, let's take advantage of this opportunity to push this again, then we could be in a really difficult position. So I'm not saying that there's no reason to negotiate. I'm just saying that the way the question was framed made me feel like you could flip a switch and then the Russians are at the table ready to negotiate with you in good faith,
So
which I don't.
It does assume certain things. You are correct, right? The reason I'm asking this question is I know all of us here, non-smokers not here with us anymore, so all of us here are in agreement that we should absolutely be funding and supporting Ukraine, encouraging them to win the war. We want them to win the war, total victory, get every piece of land back. My question becomes, right, at what point do we change in that? I'll answer the question myself, right?
Can I quickly just
please.
say about the Korea comparison? Because I read an article in Foreign Affairs trying to compare the Korean War to this war and the deal making. Is a lot of people don't realize we came to the table in Korea in like 51, maybe right early 52. But we had to fight the war for another 1 to 2 years because Stalin did not want to negotiate. Stalin was not about negotiating. Stalin was about a unified Korea under the Kim family. And so until he died, the war continued. Then he died, and then the new Soviet leadership took a different view, and that gave the opportunity for political change. And so we're talking about the Korean War. Unless we wanted to engage in a full-line retreat and abandon the South, we had to wait for the conditions to allow peace to be possible. Because if you try to put the foundation for peace on an unstable foundation, you're going to run into problems. I'm not saying it's impossible. I've seen shaky houses stay up for years when things should have fell over years ago. But it does make the odds of failure greater.
Certainly, right? And I understand that. That said, there is a point where I, again, assuming it's even possible, where there will come a point 5 years, 10 years maybe down the road where if nothing is getting done and it's just, there's just continual death and destruction. Assuming Russia would negotiate in, not good faith, that's the wrong word, but we could pressure Russia to actually come to the table. There will come a point where I'm like, okay, we've done our best. But it's just a forever war, and this needs to end. And my advocacy would be to for the U.S. and NATO and its allies to pressure Ukraine to come to the table as well. Again, I don't think we're near that point yet. I'm hoping that we never get to that point. I'm hoping that Ukraine just wins straight up. But I do want to interrogate everyone's kind of lines, and that's the purpose of the question. I also want to kind of talk a little bit about some of the what's even the word for it? Russophobia, if you will.
Russophobia?
Really?
Russophobia.
What?
Your Russophobia is
What?
insufficient?
You want more?
No.
Where are you hiding it?
I'm curious if we see this as a problem within the pro-Ukrainian circles at all. I've seen a lot of advocacy, right? After the Russian terror attack, there were some people who were Ukraine supporters that I followed were cheering it on. I thought that was beyond the pale. I thought that was unconscionable. I don't like that. And I do wonder how much of that does exist within our own circles, right? Like, and what, if anything, can we do about it? It's understandable why you would grow hatred of a people like this, but I don't think it's helpful, and I think it's kind of it's a cancer it's gonna be a problem if we don't deal with it now. What do we thought? What are our thoughts?
Yeah.
I agree. You never want to become the evil that you're fighting against, right? And thankfully, in the circles I'm a part of, like there was a lot of pushback against it. Like, yes, you're absolutely true that was existing on Twitter, but there were the people that I have my circle around were all pushing against it and saying, "Hey, this is wrong, guys. Like, don't cheer on the evil that just because of the evil's happening to you." But also understanding the pretext of, I mean, maybe if there's like a younger pro-Ukraine supporters that have been getting bombed by Russia for the last 2 years, and it's like this is like their one. I'm not advocating for that either. I'm trying to understand the mindset, but I'm just thankful that in my immediate pro-Ukraine circle, there were people pushing back against it with significant platforms too, as well. But definitely, Wick, I was seeing it as well.
Fair enough.
I gotta be straight. I mean,
ahead.
our mutual friend, Ukrainian Anna, these bastards killed her father, right? And then Anna has shown like video of going over to a nearby town and like going through destroyed apartment buildings and seeing the Russian people like putting mines there. I think it's really, really. I don't want to say callous because I think it's done with the best of intentions, but ultimately, like I'm an American in a nice house with air conditioning and a car and food, and Anna is going through fucking 10 levels of hell that make me feel like despair every time I read her Twitter, which is like bombs going overhead, like hope I live through this. I think it's really natural to hate your enemy, and I think the time to kind of examine those feelings might be like 10 years from now, like after this horror is over, when we can kind of process what has been done here. Russia started a war of aggression, and I don't want to therapy talk it. It's horrible. It's monstrous.
I want to push back against that.
Sure.
Respectfully, please. I think that if we wait 10 years before we push back against this kind of thing, it's too late, right? There are things that, especially as the war progresses and as there's more and more attacks into Ukraine, and if Ukraine turns it around and starts, again, pushing the line back and actually going into Russian territory, that kind of thinking that I saw, that kind of the all Russians are orcs, they're evil, and I hate them, is going to lead to some really bad shit that I don't want to see.
Yeah,
right?
that's actually a fair point.
Like
Wick.
we don't
Yeah.
let we can understand why the Palestinians, right, are very upset, right? But we do not condone what happens on October 7th at all, right? Like in that kind of thing when they target civilians and they take out their aggression, even if you think it's founded, right, in anything reasonable, right, that we can understand it. We don't condone it. And in fact, that's kind of why I bring this up, because again, I saw a lot of people, not to call you out here, Brianna, but a lot of people echo that sentiment. Like, I'm tone policing. We shouldn't be even, critiquing their response, their victims, etc. But I think, no, we should. I think we should critique.
I think it's the thing you said that changed my mind there is pointing out how it can lead to war crimes.
Yeah.
So I think that's well said.
Any other thoughts from Alucard or Dylan on this?
I'm not super worried. I guess. All right, I'll go ahead. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not really worried about it. I think we've had Ukrainians have been upset with Russians for quite some time now, but this is not really manifested in any kind of, some kind of war crimes fiesta by the Ukrainians. And I guess, yeah, yeah. So, as far as kind of how people feel, I mean, listen, a lot of people, uh, some people uh, like to see kind of their oppressors, murderers, et cetera, get a taste of what they've kind of brought to Ukraine. So that's kind of where that goes to. So of course, I'm kind of, intellectually, I'm against that, and broadly speaking, I think it's also kind of counterproductive for the war effort because there are some people that for real think that like, okay, we're just gonna roll into Russia and murder everybody there, and that's how that's how peace is gonna come about. But yeah, I'm not. I don't view this as surprising or kind of a big deal. And I also don't really see how you can push back against that, especially as like an outsider.
What do you mean by that?
Well, because I mean, that's just the same thing as always. Let's say you were talking to a Ukrainian who's like, "Hey, hell yeah, brother, go ISIS," and then you're telling him no, that's bad, and he's just like, hey, what the hell, you don't know kind of what I'm living through, the genocide I'm going through, et cetera, et cetera. You're just an
Yeah.
American. And that's I mean, I also do not respect that talking point, but that works in every single country on earth.
Fair enough. Dylan, what do you think?
So I wanted to answer. I didn't get to answer the other question, so I'll answer that first, and I'll answer this. So as an American and as a Ukrainian, I'm not a Ukrainian, so I'll answer as an American. But I would imagine the answer to how far you'd be willing to go for our personal interests and our strategic interests is different. Because this is how I view it as American. As American, this war is costing me tremendously very little, relatively speaking. Of the $60 billion we've spent, a very large percentage of that is equipment that my grandfather, who served in Vietnam, was using. And I'm not kidding. I'm seeing gear that my grandfather, who's 70 years old right now, he just had a 70th birthday, talked about using during Vietnam, right? That is a gear we were never, and if we did give to our own soldiers, it would be a scandal. Could you imagine the scandal if Joe Biden sends troops into Afghanistan using Vietnam era? It would be a scandal. That's the equipment we're giving them. That person that you were talking to, you were on a date with, Mercado, them not getting or getting food stamps, getting benefits, not getting benefits, getting a job, not getting a job, is not dependent upon 50 to 60-year-old troop carriers that was built by their grandmother's taxes, not their taxes. I don't think that's going to have an impact on them. So when it comes to the cost up to this point, it hasn't been that much. And there are going to be investments we're going to make into artillery manufacturing, but I have a problem if we're spending $850 billion on the military and our military cannot, at the moment where we might need to defend ourselves, can't start up the artillery production and get ready to fight this sort of a war. If we're going to spend as much as we do on the armed forces, then our industrial capacity should be at a point where any nation that starts a war with us knows very quickly will become what won the war in World War II. That industrial behemoth that the Japanese had to come to terms with, that they woke up. And so I think that there's also an American reason to at least want that part of our defense industry flexible enough. That doesn't mean we need to give them billions upon billions of dollars. In fact, it could mean that we reorganize current military spending to focus on what I think, but of course I'm saying this as me, not a military expert, are certainly American national security priorities. So I think relatively low cost. We've spent 0.3 to maybe 0.5% of our GDP on this, 5% of Pentagon spending, a lot of old gear. The tax cuts that Trump did massively expanded the deficit much more than any aid package to Ukraine could have ever done. So if my concern is about cost or helping Mercado's bad date, I would try to target the areas that I feel like could help finance that more, because you cannot turn those old Vietnam era troop carriers into food stamps. You're gonna have a very bad meal. So cost from an American perspective is very different from a Ukrainian perspective, because their cost is much greater. Their cost for them, even in total amount, it might be different overall when it comes to economic, because we're just a much bigger economy. But as a total percentage of GDP, when it comes to the lives that are lost, the cost for them is much higher. So the answer that I would give about what makes my life comfortable, what doesn't make my life comfortable, what's good for America is different than what our good friend here would probably answer, because we live two different existences. But I think we need to take into account the consequences of this. Because if we don't support the Ukrainians and we at some point say no and the Russians keep pushing and they keep going, we do need to realize, number one, our credibility is going to be shot. We made an agreement about this in the 90s with the Budapest Memorandum. We've made agreements since the 2022 invasion. We've been helping to train and been integrating with them since 2014, whether it be through our intelligence community or different training regimens, not just ours, but NATO itself. We've made a lot of commitments, and I would not like to see that hit to our credibility. And that, if we did do that, I do think that would make us a scummy ally. There's also, of course, the problem that if the Russians feel like they take over Ukraine, that's going to create a certain uncertainty about our defense commitments that might make them think, well, we've already got troops illegally stationed in Moldova. I mean, hey, they're not in NATO too. If they wouldn't defend this country 44 million, what's another country of 2.5 million, huh? That type of stuff I'm very uncomfortable with, and I feel like it'd be smarter to invest in stopping that earlier. Something like, I'm not I would say a great student of history. I'm too young to be a great student of history, but something I've noticed is the best thing you can do when these crises come up is end them as soon as possible. Because once the ball starts rolling, it all starts gearing up and you start dividing yourself, then you get into a really bad position. And so I think all of these reasons make it so that at no point, no matter what happens, and there's more reasons I could bring up as well, like Ukraine's commitment to nuclear nonproliferation. They made a commitment and are paying for that commitment that I think that we should uphold. If they're going to give up their nuclear arsenal for us, because we're scared of nuclear terrorism, we're scared of third parties having nuclear weapons, we're scared of those types of weapons capabilities spreading out to more countries, then we have to fulfill that commitment. I mean, if nation states get the message, oh, you give up your nukes, then you get invaded, then you get conquered, what's the argument against nuclear weapons? If the North Koreans can do it, then the Ukrainians can do it. The Ukrainians have some of the brightest scientists in the world from the Soviet period, many of them who were involved in the nuclear program. So I don't think it would be impossible for them either. There are real consequences here that are within America's interest outside of the basic humanitarian interest that anybody can see from looking at the death pits.
So then the question becomes, right? At what point, if it is so important to stop, to keep our commitments, to stop the ball from going forward, to stop Russia from winning, is there a point where you advocate that the U.S. and NATO get involved directly, right? Such as establishing
there are
an
scenarios in my mind where somebody could convince me of that, yes.
Okay.
But like all of them have to do with certain precedents being broken that cannot be unbroken, and we need to give a strong response to. For example, the use of a nuclear weapon, I think, would be a situation where European troops getting sent to Ukraine to make the message be, he broke this precedent, massive response, very bad idea. And so when people 20 years from now like, wait, didn't somebody else use a nuke? Oh yeah, he used the nuke and then he lost the war. If that's the message that has to be sent, if we don't want to normalize that behavior, definitely when we've now seen the nation states like North Korea can get a nuclear weapon. So if there's any time, in my opinion, that it's more important to protect this precedent, it's when the weapons in question are more accessible than ever.
Fair enough. So,
but let me just say, I'm not saying this is an endless, like we always give Ukraine weapons to the end of all time. Even though when the war's over, we still need to make sure that Ukraine has the weapons it needs to defend itself to stop this from happening again. We aren't just winning the war to get ready for the next one. We're trying to win the war so we don't have to fight the war anymore. So that is going to mean more defense commitments. But no matter what, no matter how it's negotiated, if to a certain point, like the Ukrainians feel like the casualties are too high, we would destroy our nation demographically if we continue to fight in this way. Then we have to make sure that when that time for negotiation happens, whether it's negotiating Russian withdrawal or negotiating a painful future, that the Ukrainians can negotiate and their backers can negotiate from a position of power, because that's the only thing that has been proven to work in negotiating with the Russians when it comes to Ukraine.
Can I ask Dylan a question?
please.
Wick? What's your, or I guess I'll ask the panel too as well, about Macron's rhetoric about French troops? Okay, got that answered. So I just want.
I missed this.
I
one.
like
the
flexibility. I like the flexibility. I like that he's making it a question and he's starting to prod, and we're getting very little response from the Russians from that prodding. And it is making me think that the Russians. I've already said that, you know, they called bluff on a lot of things. This might be another area where we don't know for sure, but they might be calling bluff. But the fact that they might think that we think that they might be calling bluff could be enough to dissuade the Russians from taking certain actions, or enough to make them consider the fact. And so I do like that the flexibility is happening, and I especially like that it's not us having to do it, that it's somebody else doing it for once.
Yeah.
I'm, you know, as an American, I'm happy that that's happening for us.
To clarify, the Macron statement with the French president recently came out and made some very strong, had some very strong rhetoric about direct involvement in things in Ukraine. I don't have the quote in front of me, right? So I'm hesitant to paraphrase it and get it wrong. But I
Yeah.
encourage you to look up the words.
Yeah.
If I may, well, was there a follow-up question to that, or can I?
There was one more thing. You never the Russophobia question. Did you want me
That's
to
what
answer
I
that?
was going to
that's
get
it.
into. Yes, but I
Got
wanted to
you.
make sure he was done with his questioning.
Oh, that's it. I'm good.
Sure,
Wick. Thank
go
you.
ahead, please.
As for Russophobia, do you want to re-ask the question?
Well, yes. So to kind of reset the stage here, right? I saw this a lot after the ISIS attack against the concert hall in Russia. There was thankfully not a majority, but a fairly noticeable minority of people who are pro-Ukraine, who I've followed, who've been pro-Ukraine, who were like, "Oh, fuck them," and they were cheering it on, right? They were cheering on the attacks on Russia by ISIS, right? And I was curious as to our thoughts of how prevalent that might be. And one, do we think it's an actual concern? Two, if we do, what should we do about it? Things such as that. Go ahead.
It's okay.
If you want to go, Brianna, it's fine.
I just haven't talked in a long time. I think the fight against ISIS is not an American fight. This is a worldwide fight, and I think it's really, for me personally, I'm just being completely honest here, Wick. My gut reaction, which I am embarrassed about, like that primal part of me when I heard about this terrorist attack, is good, right? Like I thought about what had happened to Anna. And I thought about just, my God, after this happened, you start reading about the history of Vladimir Putin, how he's kept power, what he's done to the Russian people. You read about the propaganda efforts. Yeah, I want that bastard gone so much, right? But, you pause and you really think about the geostrategic issues at play here. And there's a reason that the United States, we know indirectly, but probably directly, tried to warn Russia about this attack so they could stop it from happening. That's probably how they stopped the attack a few weeks ago that was the precursor to this. Which is this kind of terrorism. It's not just a Russian struggle, it's a worldwide struggle, and it's an American struggle. And it's really worth stating, these people hate us just as much. ISIS-K came from, first the Taliban came in 1994, and then ISIS-K is the spinoff of ISIS, where they're not radical enough for ISIS in their pursuit of an Islamic caliphate. So, I think it's really, really important to keep our eye on the ball and understand intelligence sharing, geostability, appreciating countries' borders and policing that, NATO, all these forces still really matter. And it's important we don't lose our principles about the dangers of global terrorism just because terrorism is striking someone who's admittedly a fucking monster.
Fair enough. Dylan, your thoughts. I'm curious.
So, man, I remember, how do I? So first off, anybody in my community that engaged in apologia or is like, "Yay, I'm happy this happened," insta ban. I don't want them in my community because if this is this, I remember when Daria Dugina died, right? And that's the daughter of Alexander Dugin.
Yes, a lot of people
when
made
when
jokes
she
about it. Yeah,
when
yeah.
when the last thing that went through her mind was her steering wheel, a lot of people
Wow.
reacted to it in a way that was, to me, kind of obvious. Where a lot of Ukrainians was like, "Of course, fuck her," because she had come to Ukraine and made pro-war propaganda, and in some instances had more than flirted with entertaining, like, "Oh, maybe this war crime's fine. Maybe if you tie up all these people in public and do this and do that." And so her also being the daughter of somebody who wants to conquer half the world for Russia. And if you read his books, The Foundation of Geopolitics, he's China, Mongolia, fucking everywhere. Anything that Russia touches is theirs. They're already the largest country in the world. I wonder how they got that way. And now they're going to get even bigger, right? So when she died, I didn't really have that much of a reaction to the people who were like, screw her. Because she, in some way, is directly connected to the war effort. She's gross. You might still even be against her being assassinated because you're saying, like, how important is she as a propaganda tool, really, compared to the other people that could have been targeted? But at the end of the day, that's somebody who's directly involved with the war. These 100 and something people, we don't know how many people are going to be killed here. We have no clue their connection to the war. It's the same. To me, it feels like those migrant workers in southern Israel that were captured by Hamas. They have nothing, literally nothing to do with the occupation of Palestinian land. If some random janitor at some mall, they have nothing to do directly, as far as we know. Now, you can say, well, this person had these beliefs about Ukraine. You can't do that on every individual basis. You can't do that with every person. And so, of course, it's disgusting, and I won't allow that type of behavior in my community. But I'll also say that I don't think that's a major problem in American politics, is people endorsing this type of behavior. It's only stuff I'm seeing that's so far hyper online. I don't see any DNC or Democrats coming out saying, man, bullseye, huh? I'm not seeing that, because that would be disgusting. They'd lose their career, and then that would be the end of them. And which it should be in that circumstances.
Agreed.
I don't know. I think that what concerns me is I see this with the Israel-Palestine stuff too, right?
Yeah.
And it shocked me when it happened. I didn't think that you would have people on both sides. Like, there were people who were pro-Israel cheering on the bombing of civilians in Gaza, and you had people who were pro-Palestine cheering on October 7th. And that kind of made me doubt my sanity, because I used to think this isn't a big deal. No one would advocate for this thing. No one would cheer on these things. We would all be kind of united in condemning violence against civilians. But I have since been disabused of that notion. So what I see from my perspective is this escalating kind of normalization of just being okay with the other side getting hit no matter how they get hit, right? Oh, Russia had a terrorist attack? Good, right? A lot of people will, again, like Brianna's very honest, and I appreciate the honesty. Her visceral initial reaction was good. And so I am worried about that kind of escalating things. I want to get other people in here, though.
Can I?
Because you guys are, I'll get you, Dylan, and Elvis. 1 second, really quick. Because you guys are a little bit more connected to Palestine and Israel and the current events happening there, would you say that you see that more with that conflict than Ukraine? I mean, maybe it's just my bubble. That's what I'm trying to break out of it, because I know I'm in a little bubble in the pro-Ukraine space. So I'm trying to talk to, and thank you, Wick, so much again for this. But with my community, I'm not seeing much of the cheering on of killing of civilians on either side, at least with what I have going on. But maybe I'm not seeing it all. That's why, again, thank you. But right now, at least with my circle, when these things happen, more people are just trying to stay up to date with the news. They're not cheering on these atrocious acts, regardless.
You're correct.
It's more so like,
you're correct. In the most, yes, but I'm not worried about the most. I'm worried about the 10%, right? I'm worried about the 15%, which is growing. The trend is at least from my observations. Again, I don't have a poll. Okay, I don't have a scientific source for you, but just my personal observations. I have seen it rise. And it is troubling and it is worrisome. And we've seen this happen before in history, where this kind of rhetoric gets normalized. It starts off small, but it becomes mainstream. You have certain people get into power, and you have horrible things happen because of that. But that would be my response to you, is that, yes, on the Israel-Gaza situation, it is much more than on the Ukrainian-Russia situation. But even in the Ukrainian-Russia situation, there's still some pretty gross things being said by both sides. But anyway.
Can we talk about some of the conspiracy theories going on?
We can in a second. We can in a second. I know Dylan wanted to get in real quick too.
Yeah, there's one last thing I wanted to throw out there that I think we should be worried about. And it's not that I don't think anybody's going to engage Russophobia. I'd like actual Russophobia and not just fucking whining, which is the majority of what I see when somebody claims Russophobia. And I'm not saying that to be like, I'm just saying it because I'm being blunt here. I've seen a lot more Russian nationalists take this and try to twist it into a weapon to kill with by directing this towards Ukraine, when I see very little to literally no evidence so far tying Ukraine to this operation. And what fucking twink singer Goebbels, what is it, shaman or something, He's the, you know who I'm talking about.
The shaman
But
guy. Yeah.
yeah, Shaman. He came out with this song called "Mobilize" like 2 days after, like not even. I think it was like within 24 hours of the shooting. He already had a hot signal for the presses about let's take this and attack Ukraine because our security services were so concentrated on Ukraine we couldn't take basic warnings about the threat of terror attacks. Something that should be political destruction for anybody who let that happen under their watch, especially when Putin's advertising himself as a security candidate, much like Netanyahu does. But that's, I mean, the Russian political system isn't very healthy. But my point is, I'm seeing like shells getting written on, and they're saying for the concert hall, for this, for that, and they're firing at the Ukrainians. Where, I mean, this is like a much bloodier Gulf of, I don't want to call it a Gulf of Tolkien incident, but I don't know how else to like compare this to Americans. They're taking something that was so far, as proven, completely unrelated to Ukraine and using it as a reason to go after Ukraine. I mean, this is like trying to, it's directly comparable for a lot of reasons, but it's like, hey, Saddam Hussein did 9/11. These two things are completely unrelated.
Well, I've also seen, to be fair, right, and just the audience, I've seen it done both ways, right? I obviously see pro-Russian people saying, oh, this was obviously Ukrainian setup, this is tied to Ukraine, but I've also seen people claim that it was a Russian false flag, that Putin did this on purpose, and I guess we're getting into your conspiracy question after all, Brianna, right? But I've seen so many takes and so many people who just refuse to believe that ISIS has done it. They will say that, oh, actually the CIA is the one that let this happen, or, oh, actually it was Mossad that was controlling ISIS, right? Like somewhere the ISIS commander is looking on his phone and reading how no one believes it was him, and they all think he's a Jew, and he's crying. He's crying himself to sleep, okay? This is a problem with how we engage with information, and I don't know what to do about it. What are our thoughts? And I want to go to 𝕬😓. I know you've been trying to get in here too. How do we deal with people like that who just refuse to believe the facts and will just grasp on and twist facts into the narrative that they think helps their side? What do we even do about this?
Oh shit. Okay, I guess I'll just answer this. I am not sure. What we do about this? I think we can,
Well,
at
I
the
guess
very
first of all,
least.
have you seen this? Is this something that you've seen a
Of
lot of?
course. I
What have you seen,
mean,
please?
oh, you talking about like for this
Yeah,
specific
as a
conspiracy?
Ukrainian, what have you seen around this attack, right? What kind of misinformation or thoughts, or like what's the Ukrainians' view on this, right? What are they saying?
Well, I guess some people kind of analogize this to the some of the suspicious, for example, I think apartment bombings that had occurred early on in the Putin administration that were used to start the second Chechen war, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's kind of the the general idea
Really,
of
in your opinion, the general
no, no, no,
feeling
no.
among Ukrainians is that this was a Russian thing?
No, among the conspiracy theorists. Of course, there are people who
Oh, okay, fair
believe
enough.
in, the whole like Jewish conspiracies. There are those people in every country on earth, I would say. I guess for me, it's kind of the more interesting question is how do you break through to these people? Because I know in the United States we have our dearest Trumpkins who are just also basically they permanently inhabit a parallel reality. And so I would say that in terms of how we combat this, I think that first thing we need to do is to actually do our best to confront them with the facts. So I think, I mean, in this case, there are not a lot of facts. Like it's a really a pretty straightforward case. I don't know to what extent you'll be able to convince people out of that, but for instance, for people that let's say are against support for Ukraine for conspiratorial reasons, I think it's important that maybe Mr. Joe Biden stops waffling about as long as it takes without even saying what it is, and actually kind of outline some of the things that I said earlier about the actual amounts of what we've provided, et cetera, et cetera. What is our goal? Such things. So number one, I think it's you might as well try being kind of direct and maybe even aggressive with these dum dums. And then I guess I don't know, the alternative is just almost to like disenfranchise these people. Like that's kind of unfortunately the conclusion that I came to, because this is just one kind of one last kind of quick story thing is that in Mariupol, while these people, there were people sitting in the basements while they were getting, bombed to literal bits, and there were still people sitting in those basements and like arguing that actually it's Ukraine that is bombing us, knowing that that was impossible. So even like a severely personally traumatic event was not enough to squeeze this idiocy out of them. So
Yep.
like I honestly, I think some people, maybe a lot of people, are just too far gone, and I don't know how you can kind of fix this without just kind of artificially taking away their opportunity to like voice their concerns and act in some way.
Mhm. Other thoughts, please.
So yeah, I was one of the. I came out when I was because I had the breaking news stream going on with it, and I had the reason why I had said false flag to start with. Number one, because I have old red pill mega brains, so like I'm susceptible to going down rabbit holes easier, and I recognize that. But so I want to do better about working on that aspect. But then when ISIS-K came out and admitted to it, and like it was like there's nothing to question about it, I had to switch to okay, it was ISIS. But immediately when people were, and including me, were thinking of the false flag was Russia's done this before, 1999 apartment bombings. Like
Right.
this has happened. This is part of the course for what Russia has done. So people, including me, were like, man, this is what Russia does. And they're struggling on the front lines. They're gaining marginal ground. But it's like Dylan said, they have no negotiating power. Russia themselves have no negotiating power either on the front lines. They're getting their, it's not good for them. So when people had came out and said this, it's understandable. And then, well, I mean, it got worse for me too because I had another YouTuber who's actually Russian came on. He's anti-Putin, and he came, and his name is 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙, and he came. He told me about the location of the place, and like Trump held his beauty pageant there in 2013 at the Crocus Mall, and it's like you got to be careful with it because I don't want to get too conspiratorial with it and remain within the facts, but people that like to go down these rabbit holes, including me sometimes, get interested on it, and it's important to bring it back. That's why I like Dylan so much because he brings me back to the reality of it and keeps me grounded and not fall into these traps too much. But at the end of the day, it was
Well, it
ISIS that
is.
claimed it,
Yeah.
and it's easy to go off into crazy directions about it.
Well, I want to touch on that because I think it's important to kind of like drive home, and we are, we're winding down a little bit, so we'll get to close things in a second. I want to respect everyone's time, but I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. I think that I'm susceptible to this too, right? You see a
Yep.
situation happen, you use all the prior knowledge you have of that situation, and it could be very extensive prior knowledge, right? And you build a narrative in your head, and this event fits this narrative. I think that's wrong. I think that's we are ill-advised to engage in this kind of behavior. That's why I try my best. I'm not perfect at it, but I try my best not to just go off with a new piece of information, and instead to be just like, okay, well, let's see what actually is happening. What will come out when we have more coverage of this, when the dust settles, etc. But it's just so easy. And you mentioned you were live streaming at the time. That I think drives this in a way that is new, at least to the average citizen. That we are incentivized to come out with interesting, quick takes, and to help feed into people's narratives that they want to buy, because there's a market out there for anti-Russian propaganda. There's a market out there for anti-Ukrainian propaganda. There's a market out there for almost everything you can think of. And so if you can feed that market and you can be one of the first adopters to it, it's lucrative. It's lucrative. So yeah, I just think that's worth putting a pin in. But I wanted to hear Brianna's opinion on this. You brought up the question after all, right? So what are your thoughts on the
It's
conspiracy
really
and stuff?
disturbing, Wick. I think other people have covered that. Let's be really clear. When this happened, there were reasonable questions by reasonable people out there. Vladimir Putin does have a history of using false flags to maintain his power structure. That is a fact. It's also true that Ukraine has managed to strike deep within Russia before. So it's a reasonable question to have. But I found two things really disturbing, Wick. The first is, obviously Putin came out on TV, I think it was 2 days ago, and very clearly tried to point the finger at Ukraine. There's no evidence for it whatsoever, and he's trying to control his population by making it sound like Ukraine did this and that's why they should be angry at them. And again, I said this earlier in this this panel, I want to come back to it. Russia is holding together like it is like scotch tape around a bowl that is broken. They're having to spend ungodly amounts of money on propaganda. They've lost, can someone remind me, is it 100,000 soldiers that they've lost in this war that makes no sense? They're having to do huge amounts of propaganda to like tell the population that it's worth it. If you go out on a Russian street, you can look up in the sky and see like billboards saying that we've got to stop the Nazis, the Ukrainian Nazis, join this, serve your country. You can see like ads on TV like saying, don't be a security guard, you need to go be a real man and serve on the front lines. People are getting a notice that they have been drafted and are literally having to go the next day, and then they get sent to the front lines without training. So it is really obvious why Putin is trying to blame this on Ukraine. That is just a lie, and we need to say so in media very strongly. There's a second component of this that is really pissing me off, Wick. And that is, I cannot tell you how many times I've seen this anti-Semitic horseshit on Twitter from the fringe. People out there saying, you know, it was so suspicious that ISIS has never attacked Israel, even though they absolutely have, you know, insinuating that somehow like Jews are behind this, insinuating that, you know, Vladimir Putin paid ISIS-K somehow to conduct this attack. And I'm not going to get into it with individual journalists, but I've seen journalists who I used to respect kind of soft pedal some really crazy conspiracy theories. And look, it's ISIS-K, y'all. They claimed credit on their social media channels immediately afterwards with very slickly produced video. Like they are out there pointing to themselves and saying, we take credit for this. And I think it is so concerning that we cannot tell up from down, left from right so completely that we've got to lead to conspiracy theories when like the truth is right in front of us and it's a threat to us as well.
Okay. Any thoughts on
Really
that?
quick,
Go ahead,
yeah, really
please.
quick question, like a follow up, maybe, because I my finger on the pulse of Palestine, Israel is not on. Like I've been
Sure.
more focused on Ukraine completely because that's been my lane and I'm educated on it, and I want to branch out. But I am even like I haven't peddled any news or nothing on that conflict, but I'm even being called a Zionist, a Jew supporter. I'm like, how is it? So I guess
And
my
on
question
the record,
is
I am a Jew supporter.
I am too.
I also
yeah,
support
as
the
most of
Jews.
us are.
Okay.
Yes, yes, all of us are. But I'm not. But that isn't my identity, I guess. You know what I mean? Like I'm not.
Sure.
I'm not even talking really
Yeah, you
about the
don't like
conflict.
no
So,
one. And if I may, I hate to cut
Yeah.
you off, but I appreciate that. Like I appreciate
Mm.
people who are willing to say, I don't know much about this, so I'm not going to really speak on it. We need
Yeah.
more of that. But continue, please.
Yeah, I mean, I was in Ukraine on October 7th, right? I was there in
Oh,
Kyiv. And
wow.
the flags were lit up. Israel flags everywhere. Dylan, you were still there, right?
Yeah, I was in Kiev same
Yeah,
day.
you were in Kyiv same day. So, I mean, but even then, I was like, I don't really, because I have a Ukraine community, and I don't really want to pull them into another conflict. And then now they're like, because it really did rift the pro-Ukraine community on October 7th. So I kind of was like, we'll just focus on Ukraine, keep it on Ukraine, internal U.S. stuff. But I'm seeing that Palestine-Israel conflict seep over even into Ukraine now, and we're getting called Zionists and like all of this. We're just supporting Ukraine because Zelensky's Jewish, and it's crazy. And I'm wondering, is it getting worse? Like, is that
Yes.
space?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's really bad.
That's all I got. Sounds
Look,
bad.
I've
I had
talked
a new. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go.
I've talked to Noah Smith, no opinion about this. He equates it, and I tend to agree, that this is kind of like a Cold War II, basically, right? Kind of being drawn, lines being drawn, right? And for whatever reason, Russia has, again, come out and kind of been anti-Israel in this, or at least Russian supporters, like Syria Girl, you know, the big accounts, okay?
Big accounts, yeah.
The big accounts, Stalemate and all that. So there is a a section of the media space we dwell in who will tie everything to the current thing. And the current thing
Yep.
is now Israel-Palestine, and that is kind of what is being focused on. I think that, again, what I worry about is that we forget what's happening in Ukraine because, again, Ukraine is being bombed as we speak. Like there are missiles being fired at Ukrainian cities as we speak.
Yeah.
This is happening. And yes, Israel-Gaza is important, but we can't just focus on that to the exclusion of every fucking thing else. And you are right to say that this is seeping into everything else, unfortunately. And that's happening with unfortunately, all kinds of advocacy, all kinds of different things. I've seen things like the whole idea of one struggle, right? Like, you can't be pro-Palestinian if you don't support feminism. Or you can't be pro-Palestinian if you don't support this, right? And it's kind of like lumping everything into this omni cause, and it's creating problems, as you've seen. But Dylan, did you have some thoughts here? You were trying to get in?
Yeah, you were talking about this disinformation and how do we communicate with these people. So Brianna said she won't call out individual journalists. I will. Mario Newfall, David Sachs.
It's my favorite thing.
Not a journalist, pieces of shit. Please watch.
Yeah, I mean,
them.
I'm gonna people who consider themselves journalists. I don't consider all of them, but consider themselves journalists. These are people that immediately when it happened, I know Mario Newfall published a report that the people who did it were actually Ukrainian Chechen soldiers. He had the wrong pictures. He was accusing commanders who are currently in service in Ukraine. You can't be in Russia if they're in Ukraine right now. Comparing them, saying this was it. His source, a Twitter account, had to come out a few hours later and say, okay, I guess that technically wasn't real. David Sachs, he comes out just floating that he believes it's likely that the Ukrainians did it. Did he present any evidence? No, but he certainly liked to attempt towards the reinforcing his already prescribed beliefs about the war and pushing people against supporting Ukraine. So he thinks it's likely. He didn't present any evidence, so fuck him, right? These guys, these are, in my opinion, con men, scam artists. These are people who want money. These are people who do not care about reporting on the facts. I generally don't think so. I think David Sachs might be too stupid, so I'll give an exception to him. Mario Newfall, I don't think isn't too stupid. I think he is just a grifter. Okay, so I am making a little bit of a distinction here, right? But the combination of grifters, knuckle draggers, and window lickers have all come together, and immediately when anything happens as a terror attack or anything that's newsworthy, they'll be the first to jump on it, and they'll grab anything. And many of them genuinely think that if it shows up in their feed, they can just take it, post it, and then source their feed as proof, as the source. That's what Mario Newfall does all the time. These are the people that Elon Musk are pushing on the platform as like the big headliners. When he talks about, what type of reporters do I trust? He points towards these people. So now how do we think Elon's getting all these ideas? Can we start to see the picture of how Elon has gotten worse and worse and worse and worse about the war as time's gone on? It's because he surrounds himself with the worst people that could be advising him on the war. Not Ukrainians, not people with direct experience on the ground, armchair commentators doing it for clicks, which is not a good way to run a social media website that you're saying is trying to compete with traditional news outlets. Now, so there's part of the problem. They jump on it too soon. A lot of them want to make sure that whatever this is, it's a puzzle piece that reinforces their already prescribed beliefs, right? So for Ukrainians, or for people who are really supportive of Ukraine, and to the point where maybe they'll look aside having all the evidence, it's the Russians did it. It's a false flag. We'll go back to 1999. We don't know. 1999. Number one, I'll just say we don't need to go back to Chechnya, which is, by the way, still disputed whether that was a false flag. We can go to the start of this war. They launched false flags. At the very start of this war, they said the Ukrainians invaded them. They had Russian soldiers dress up like Ukrainian soldiers and waddle across the border and say, wow, I guess we had to invade them. That happened like less than 3 years ago. So we don't need to go like 20. The Russians have engaged in false flags, and we've seen them engage in false flags. It's the same shit with the biolabs. It's the same shit with so many of these different instances they brought up as just shit flinging that they were throwing at the wall to see whatever could stick. So the Russians have already engaged in false flags, but to me, this doesn't have any of the signs of a false flag. It's too ambiguous. The Russians are not that. They're not going to make it like, who could it be? I don't know if you remember when they found the Ukrainian spies, quote unquote, in Russia. Somebody must have told whatever FSB agent that, hey, they have SIM cards, like with cameras and stuff. So put that on the bed with the swastikas and the
The
pictures of Hitler
Sims
taped to the
games.
wall, etc. And then they just put a Sims video game on the bed next to all these weapons and paraphernalia, neon Sims video game. And I'm like, what could that be? And I realized somebody told some FSB agent put a SIM card on the bed, and they just came with the video game. That's what happened. So
Three
like this type
copies,
of
too.
stuff. Like this type of stuff, to me, if this was a Russian false flag, the people doing it would have had full Ukrainian uniforms. They would have been going, Slava Ukraine, Batko nash Bandera. They would have been screaming that at the top of their lungs. And so to me, I think it's less likely that it's a Russian terror attack, not only because it lines up with everything that would be an ISIS terror attack and ISIS has a reason to do it, but because it's too ambiguous. So I think the odds are towards it being a ISIS terror attack. I've seen some of the evidence, like the van, that was bullshit. They said it was Ukrainian plates. They were Belarusian plates. I checked. So I do want to just quickly say, as to connecting to these people, right? We've got like something perfect for these people. Like, I feel like these people we should be talking to them almost like a crack dealer, because this is the perfect government conspiracy. It's open. We know it's a government conspiracy of the Russians saying, terror attack, invade that country. It's like, it's everything that they wanted to tell everybody else about the Bush invasion of Iraq. It's everything. It's the government conspiracy. It's a lie about a terror attack. It's being used to further their geopolitical greedy interests, send people into the meat grinder. It's amoral. It's horrible. A lot of dead bodies, so it's pornographically violent. It's got everything for the stereotypical Alex Jones type to be like, government conspiracy. But because it's not the government they want it to be, it's not the American government that they think maybe would bring in more viewership, then they push it away. So I would say for the whack jobs, let's sell it to them like whack job. You know, go on the boards with all of the adrenochrome and the QAnon stuff and start being like, the government in 1984, Russians, you know, just remember who was the communist, the Russians. And like, I think you could sell it to them that way. You know, that's one way to go about it.
I don't know
But
about
more
that,
seriously, you need to give
You have to
people
have some
something to
strong-brained
believe
people.
in. You need to give people foundations for trying to figure out what's true and what isn't. And that's going to have to take some trust, which a lot of these people who believe in these conspiracies don't have. They don't trust institutions. They don't trust colleges. They don't trust experts. And so you've got the main barrier, the main barrier you got to get through here is getting them to trust an institution or trust something that can help them guide themselves through this, whether it be trusting a diversity of like input of information from different outlets, whether it's trusting specific fact checkers or specific institutions to try to check this information out. You need to find a way to build trust with someone, even if it's just some independent journalist. It doesn't need to be mainstream media, but it can't be consmen, salesman who immediately when a terror attack happens says they have all the answers in the universe. If somebody tells you have all the answers in the universe, they're lying to you. They don't.
Yeah. One thing I'll touch on, then we'll get to closings. You're right. These people don't have any trust in the institutions, but at least institutions are partly to blame for that, right? Unfortunately, the Iraq War and the lead up to the Iraq War broke people's brains when it came to trusting American intelligence. That was an own goal, if you will. That was something that we did not have to do, but we did, and it has poisoned the well to a lot of people. That's why in the run-up to the invasion of Ukraine, right, back in 2022, 2021, a lot of people, like American intelligence, like Russia's coming in, Russia's gonna do this. You better be careful. Russia's doing this. Up until the day of, people were saying, "Nah, it's not gonna happen." I remember arguing vociferously with people who claimed, like, "No, there's no way that Russia would ever do this. Like, the Americans are lying once again to just warmonger." Right? I had screaming matches with people, right? And so, unfortunately, like the conspiracy theory group, it's difficult to deal with because their whole point of the government lying, I mean, yeah, sometimes yes, and so that's been hard. But gang, this has been a little bit of a different format, right, that I've tried, less combative, more conversational. If you've enjoyed this, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. And come in tomorrow. We're going to have call-ins. Wednesday, we're going to have Andrew back and a few others. We're going to be talking about the border crisis. That should be fun. Thursday, we're going to be talking about DHS's working on campuses and using Hamas as an excuse to get more, let's just say, to spy on its citizens more. That's fun. And then Friday, we are going to have Adam Mockler. We're going to have I'm Really Important, Counterpoints, and Principles Before Politics. We're going to talk about communicating with people who are outside of your party. That should be fun, too. Okay,
That'd be fun.
gang. Closing statements. Oh, super chats. Let me read those just real quick. There's only a couple. $5 from Testicle Johnson. As a proud American, I think that we need to end funding to Ukraine and instead secure our southern border from the ongoing invasion. God bless America. Thanks for the $5. And $5 from Infallible Foul. Wick, did you notice anyone on the pro-Israel side cheering on what's happening in Gaza? Yes, I did. It was disgusting. Okay, that said, closing statements. I want to start with 𝕖𝐿card, work our way around, and we'll give Dylan final word. 𝕖𝐿card, tell people where to find you, right? And closing thoughts on the whole situation. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm 𝕖𝐿card on Twitter and on Twitch as well. I have not streamed in a long time, but I think I might be getting back to it. So that would be
Let's go.
really cool if I could do something like that. Thank you very much to Wick for having me here. Thank you to all of the co-panelists. I guess I'll reiterate my message that it is important to kind of be honest and be more aggressive in terms of kind of discussing the whole Ukraine situation, because I feel like, kind of on the Republican side, like, as we've all discussed, it's the MAGA folks, which that's kind of a whole different beast. You might need to kind of
A whole
invent
other debate, Wick.
yeah, you might need to invent whole new philosophies
Mhm.
to like break through to these people. But then
Mhm.
also on our kind of, liberal democratic side, we have a lot of people that kind of mindlessly guzzle whatever Biden says, which I think is dreadfully wrong, and in Ukraine's case has very unfortunate consequences. I guess on the back of this, I want to call out Destiny as the biggest Biden guzzler. Come see me, dude. We gotta figure some things out, because I think he has come around on a lot of his positions that I thought were bad, but there's definitely still a lot of attempts to kind of shove every critique of Biden under the rug on his part. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, so support Ukraine. Make sure your levels of Russophobia remain sufficient. And yeah, thank you very much once again for
Oh,
having
thanks
me.
for being here. Really appreciate you. If you do start streaming, I hope people will check you out. Next
Thank
up, Andrew Mercado. Go ahead.
Oh, Amanda Mercado. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm on YouTube, Mercado Media, streaming every day except for Sundays. The latest news in Ukraine, and then I'm starting to branch out into other topics and other news stories, so that way I can bring that Ukraine expertise that I've developed and I continue to develop, because I feel like I'm not done. Like there's still more to learn. It's like I'm not done learning about Ukraine. So I'll bring them back to Ukraine and tell you how important it is. So check me out. Again, stream every day. Thank you, Wick, so much for having me on. Thank you for having me be a part of this. It's my first like panel like this before, so it's really, really cool. Thank you again. It's very important to support Ukraine. Continue to advocate for Ukraine aid. Call your Congress members if you're an American citizen. If you support Ukraine, continue to. If you're a non-MAGA Republican, get in the ears of the MAGA Republicans, because I'm sure you have friends that are. So get in their ear about how it's not any of the conspiratorial BS that MAGA is pushing, and support Ukraine's victory. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for being here. And again, we'll see you Wednesday. And it should be a little more contentious then. Again, this was a different style I wanted to try. But thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you. Check him out, gang. He's great. Brianna Wu, go ahead.
I got a confession, Wick. Do you remember when you invited me onto this to the show? Do you remember what happened? You said, I'm putting together a panel on Monday on the terror attacks on Russia. And I'm like, woo! I want in. I had no idea we were talking about Ukraine today. I way overstudied for ISIS-K, so I am.
Well, my
really
bad if I communicated it poorly.
No. It's just I'm way like, oh my god, I've got so much to say about this. Like these dudes are so fucked up when you really start reading about it. So if you like what I'm doing, I do a show with Counterpoints. It's called Counterfire. Very important to me right now is there's a new Princess Peach game out. I am the #2 Princess Peach speedrunner in the entire world at Super Mario Brothers 2. I'm extremely, extremely good at that game because I've been playing it since 1988. We finally have another Princess Peach game. It's called Princess Peach Showtime. I am streaming my speedrunning efforts over there. That's at Oh Yeah, Brianna Wu on Twitch. You know, it's going to be us repeating segments and memorizing it, but Princess Peach speedrunning is amazing. So come check that out.
Check her out, gang. Counterfire and Oh Yeah, Brianna Wu. Thanks for
Oh
being
Yeah,
here.
Brianna Wu.
Really appreciate you. Last but certainly not least, Dylan Burns. Go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I was muted. Closing statement. Man, I guess my closing statement would be is that it's very dystopian, the amount of informational control that exists in Russia, which means that this is going to quickly be weaponized against a country that had nothing to do with it. In fact, I think that someone could make the argument that the invasion of Ukraine created such a focus on the Russian invasion of Ukraine from a security standpoint, with the Russian intelligence services spending on making sure that no Ukrainian children in occupied territory tie any yellow ribbons to trees, when they could have been concentrating on stopping terrorists from doing terrorism. When you invade, when you get yourself tangled up in these types of things, they tend to be quite distracting. Essentially, especially if you say it's an existential struggle for the country, then it's going to take precedent over everything. And this is the result of that security precedent. I think at least slightly. It's not the only reason this happened, but it is part of the reason. But due to how the information is controlled in Russia, what should be political suicide for Putin, when 3 days ago he was like, "Oh, these comments about terror attacks from the United States are just meant to destabilize the nation," because that is not going to be allowed to be pointed out or commented on in the Russian state media space, nobody's going to be encouraged to critically think that way. And I think that's very, very sad. It's very sad. Outside of that, my name is Dylan Burns. I guess I do things on the internet. You can go check them out. Dylan Burns TV, Dylan Burns Live. I'm going back overseas in about a month, so you can follow me there if you want to check out what I'm doing.
Did YouTube ever repair their unfair decision about your channel?
No, I'm still I've been demonetized going on 6 months.
Oh,
Damn.
that's gross.
No,
gang, check them out. Support them anyway. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate you taking your time. Gang, again, tune in tomorrow. Relaxed call-in day where I don't have to research nothing. And then Wednesday we have the border debate, and that should be fun. Okay, we're gonna rate out. I'll see you guys later. Bye, everyone.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, hey. Oh, okay.
We're
Damn, I
almost
wanted
done.
to.
We're almost out. We got 5 more seconds before I have to raid.
Gotcha.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Boom.
All right.
Okay, now they're
Damn, I